before we dive into the next exciting story, drop a comment below and let me know, what time is it where you're watching from? I'm curious to see where everyone's tuning in from around the world. My name is Justin Murphy, but most people call me Danny. I was 41 when I drove my RV deep into the heart of Withloochee State Forest looking for solitude. What I found instead was something I can't explain, something that should never exist. I had been a firefighter for nearly 20 years before I quit, not by choice. My last call had ended in tragedy, a house fire that took my partner's life. I got out. He didn't. Survivor's guilt, they called it. I just called it a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. So I decided to disappear for a while, park my RV somewhere off-grid where no one could find me. Not my ex-wife, not my old station buddies, not the therapist who kept insisting I process my grief. I wasn't interested in healing. I just wanted silence, but silence wasn't what I found. The first night, I woke to a scream. Not just any scream, a sound so sharp, so full of pain that it sliced through my skull like a damn ice pick. It sounded like a woman, but not exactly. There was something wrong about it. Too shrill, too stretched, too long. I bolted upright, heart pounding. Outside, my fire had burned low. The woods beyond my RV were pitch black, too still. The sound had stopped, but the ringing in my ears remained. I told myself it was an animal, maybe a panther, maybe a fox. I knew better, but I forced myself to believe it. Then I heard footsteps, slow, circling the RV. I grabbed my flashlight and flicked it on, aiming it out the window. Nothing, just trees and shadows. I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, I stepped outside and saw something strange. A few feet from my fire pit, the dirt was disturbed, like something had been standing there for hours, watching. I shook it off, blaming my own paranoia, and spent the day hiking. The deeper I went into the forest, the quieter it became. No birds, no insects, just that thick, dead air pressing against my ears. Then I nearly tripped over it. A burned-out structure. Small, almost like a shack. It wasn't on any maps I'd checked before coming here. It looked old, but not ancient. Maybe a couple of decades, judging by the way the wood had blackened and split. I stepped closer, kicking at the ashes. That's when I saw the names, carved into the charred floorboards, scratched deep into the wood like someone had done it with their bare nails. Some were worn away by time, but others I froze. One of them was mine, Justin Murphy. I stepped back fast, my pulse hammering. I'd never been here before. No one knew I was here. And yet there it was, my name, burned into the bones of this ruined place. Something rustled behind me. I turned too fast, nearly falling. My flashlight flickered as I scanned the trees. Nothing. But then, through the dense undergrowth, I saw it. A figure, watching me. It was only there for a second, just a flicker of movement before it melted into the shadows. But my gut twisted at the shape of it, the way it stood, the way it leaned, just a little too far forward, like it was waiting for me to speak first. I didn't. I ran. I got back to my RV at dusk, out of breath, every nerve in my body screaming at me to leave. But when I reached for my keys, they weren't there. I tore the place apart, searching the countertops, the drawers, my backpack. Nothing. Like they had just disappeared. Then the radio crackled. I hadn't touched it, hadn't even turned it on. But now it was hissing with static, cutting in and out like a half-tuned station. I stepped closer, heart pounding. The noise sharpened. Mercer. I stopped breathing. Help me. A woman's voice, ragged, full of pain. Distant, like she was speaking through a tunnel that stretched beyond time. Then the screaming started. It blasted through the radio at a deafening pitch, so loud and shrill that I dropped to my knees, clutching my head. It was inside me, rattling my skull, vibrating through my teeth like my bones were coming apart. My nose started bleeding. I reached up and ripped the radio out of the dashboard. Silence. My whole body shook as I stared at the radio in my hands. My ears were still ringing. My skin felt raw. I was leaving. Right now. I grabbed my emergency bag and a flashlight and bolted outside. I didn't care about the RV anymore. I'd hike out to the road, flag down a car, whatever it took. But the second my boots hit the dirt, I froze. Because standing at the tree line, illuminated by the last sliver of dying daylight, was her. Blackened skin sloughing from her face, eyes, hollow pits of darkness. She screamed. My flashlight exploded in my hand. The sound sent me crashing to the ground, gasping for air. My lungs felt like they were on fire. My vision went white. When I could finally see again, she was gone. I don't know how long I lay there. When I finally pulled myself up, my whole body was trembling. I turned toward the road, forcing my legs to move. But no matter how far I walked, I always ended up back at the burned clearing. Like the forest had twisted itself around me. Like I'd never left. A part of me knew then. Knew that I wasn't getting out of here. The woods whispered my name. And then I saw myself standing at the edge of the clearing near the wreckage of the burned shack. My own face, my own eyes. But wrong. The copy of me smiled, not a normal smile. Too wide, too sharp, like the skin was splitting just to stretch the mouth that far. I took a step back. The other Danny didn't move. Instead, he lifted his hand and pointed. I turned, and the burned woman was standing right behind me, her mouth opened. I never heard the final scream. I just remember the fire, the heat swallowing me whole, the crackling of my own flesh peeling away, the sound of my own voice joining hers, burning in agony. And then, nothing. Days later, a ranger found my RV, burned down to the frame, no body inside, just my name, carved into the trees, and the radio, still playing, a soft, distant scream. My name is Betty Kennedy, and back in 2018, I decided to take my RV out to a quiet spot near the Mount Hood National Forest in Oregon. My wife was usually my camping partner, but she caught a bad flu, so I went solo. I figured I could manage a few nights alone, read a few books, and fish. My idea of the perfect downtime was no phone service, no one around, and a lake where the fish didn't mind biting. I parked the RV in a secluded spot right near a lake, and after a few hours of quiet, I felt my shoulders drop. The only sounds were the soft rush of the wind in the pines and the occasional splash in the water. I set up a few fishing lines on the edge of the lake and grabbed a beer from the cooler, sinking into my camping chair as the evening settled in. On the first night, I thought I heard something outside the RV around midnight, just a few crunches on the gravel, like someone was walking. I figured it was an animal, a deer maybe, though I still got up and looked outside, finding nothing, just shadows and the silent forest. I brushed it off. This wasn't my first solo camping trip, and I was used to hearing noises now and then. The second night, though, I heard it again. This time, the crunching was slower, deliberate, not the kind of sound an animal makes. I was lying in bed trying to read by flashlight, but the noise made me put down the book. I listened for a few moments, then quietly got up and peered out the small RV window. Standing near the edge of the clearing was a tall man. He was in his 50s, I'd guess, with gray hair and clothes that looked too clean for camping. He stood completely still, his face tilted up as if he was sniffing the air. It wasn't exactly the type of scene I expected to see on a solo camping trip, and my first thought was that he was probably a ranger. I decided to step out and ask if he needed help. As I opened the door, he turned slowly toward me, and I noticed his lips twitching into what could have been a smile, or maybe a snarl. I felt my stomach tighten, but I ignored it. "Hey there," I called. "Can I help you with something?" He didn't answer. He just kept staring at me with that fixed, unnerving look, his lips parting a little like he was tasting the air. There was something off about him, but I tried to keep things normal. You camping out here too?" I asked, trying to lighten the mood. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was scratchy, like he hadn't used it in a long time. "Got lost," he muttered, his words almost a whisper. "Been out here, looking for a place to stay." I tried to keep my tone casual. "Well, there's a town about 20 miles south. I could show you the way in the morning." His eyes shifted, and for a moment I thought he'd agree. But then he looked down at my fishing gear lying on the ground by the water. "I haven't had fish in a long time," he said, his voice barely audible. It was then that I noticed his hands. They were covered in what looked like dried blood. My heart started to race, but I forced myself to stay calm. I have some food in the RV," I said, inching back toward the door. "You're welcome to some if you're hungry." He took a step forward, still smiling that strange half-snarl of his. "I don't eat canned food," he said, as if that settled things. I nodded slowly, my hand reaching for the door handle. "All right then, well, I'd best get some sleep." Before I could turn around, he took another step toward me, closer now, and his voice dropped to a raspy whisper. "What are you doing out here alone, friend?" There was something chilling in the way he said friend, as if it meant the opposite. I swallowed hard, keeping my voice steady. Just camping. I like the quiet. He tilted his head, examining me with a strange intensity. You're lying. My pulse hammered in my chest, but I forced a casual smile. No, I'm just a regular guy out for some peace and quiet. His eyes narrowed and he took another slow step forward. I knew that I needed to get back inside, lock the door, and maybe even drive off if he kept pressing closer. All right, I said, keeping my voice as calm as I could. You take care now. I turned, and that's when I heard him sprint forward. Instinct kicked in and I threw myself into the RV, slamming the door just in time to hear his fists pounding against it. The door shook, the thin walls rattling as his voice grew louder, angry. Let me in, friend, he screamed, his voice twisted with rage. You think you're safe in there? I scrambled back, locking myself in the small bathroom, listening as he tried the handle, then started circling the RV, tapping on each window, trying each latch. I pressed myself against the wall, holding my breath, hoping he'd get bored or think better of it. But he didn't. For hours, he lingered outside, muttering to himself, his voice carrying words I couldn't quite make out. Occasionally, he'd laugh, a low, mirthless sound that sent chills down my spine. When I finally dared to peek out through a crack in the bathroom door, I saw his face inches from the window, his eyes scanning the inside of the RV as if he were hunting something or someone. Eventually, he moved back, retreating into the forest as the first light of dawn broke over the trees. I waited a full hour, my heart still hammering, before I worked up the nerve to unlock the door and step outside. I thought he was gone, but as I moved to collect my fishing gear, I found a makeshift camp hidden in the trees nearby, littered with rotting food, empty cans, and something else. Bones. Small bones. Some picked clean, others still covered in dried blood. When I looked closer, I saw something scrawled on a piece of bark near the edge of his camp. The words were carved in deep, jagged letters. One more to go. That was when I knew he hadn't just been lost. He'd been hunting. And that night, I'd been the one he'd chosen. I stumbled back from the trees, my eyes darting around the quiet, misty forest. Every crackle of a branch sounded too loud, too close. I grabbed my fishing rod, not even caring about the tackle box I'd left on the shore. I just needed to get out. I sprinted back to the RV, threw myself inside, and started the engine. The tires kicked up gravel as I tore out of the clearing. I could barely keep my hands steady on the wheel, gripping it so hard my knuckles went white. The forest blurred past me as I drove, trying to leave every trace of him behind. I didn't slow down until I hit the main road. It was only then that I let myself breathe, glancing over my shoulder to make sure he wasn't somehow trailing me. When I finally pulled into the nearest town, I parked outside a diner, its lights casting a soft glow in the early morning. I didn't care about looking disheveled or that I was the only customer there before dawn. I just wanted to be around people. The waitress took one look at me and brought over a cup of coffee without even asking. Rough night? She asked, eyeing the scrapes on my arms from where I'd bolted through the trees. I nodded, trying to steady myself enough to take a sip. You could say that, I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. She looked at me a moment, then leaned in, speaking quietly. You're not the first. There have been stories of strange folks around those woods. Folks who don't belong, who are hunting something. I felt the chill as her words echoed what I'd seen. What do you mean, hunting? I asked, needing to hear someone else say it out loud. She lowered her voice even more. People go missing now and then. Then, as I left the diner, I saw it. A small crumpled piece of bark wedged into my windshield wiper. Jagged letters carved into it. I know where you are. I left that town and never looked back. My name is Scott Watkins, and what I'm about to share happened back in 1999. I was a Navy SEAL, and we were deployed on a secret mission in the dense forests of Oregon, not far from the small town of Tillamook. We were there to investigate a series of bizarre disappearances that had local authorities stumped. Being in the military, we didn't get all the details, just enough to know that something weird was going on, and it was our job to figure it out. We arrived in Tillamook under the cover of night. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the town itself seemed cloaked in an unsettling quiet. My team consisted of 5 men: Lieutenant Jake Mortensen, our commanding officer; Marco Sullivan, a communications expert; Victor Reyes, our medic; and Thomas "Tommy" Delgado, a demolition specialist. All solid guys, men I had trusted with my life on more than one occasion. Our contact was a local sheriff named Rick Dobbins. He briefed us quickly, his voice tense. "There have been over a dozen disappearances in the last 6 months," he said, running a hand through his graying hair. "No bodies, no signs of struggle. People just vanish." We set up our base in an old abandoned ranger station deep in the woods. It was a 2-story structure, creaky and dilapidated, but serviceable. The first few days were uneventful. We patrolled the woods, using all our training to navigate the dense underbrush and towering trees, but we found nothing out of the ordinary. Then, on the 4th night, things started to change. We were sitting around the old wooden table in the ranger station, eating MREs and sharing stories, when we heard it. A scream, sharp and piercing, cutting through the stillness of the night. We bolted outside, weapons at the ready, but the forest around us was eerily silent. "Sounded like a woman," Tommy said, scanning the darkness with his flashlight. "Stay alert," Mortensen ordered. "We're not alone out here." We didn't find anything that night, but the scream lingered in our minds. The next day, we split into pairs to cover more ground. Mortensen and I took the northern sector while the others spread out to the east and west. We trudged through the forest, the undergrowth thick and unyielding, moving in silence, our senses on high alert. After a few hours, we came across an old cabin, half hidden by moss and vines. It looked abandoned, but we decided to check it out. The inside was musty and dark, filled with broken furniture and decaying debris. As we cleared each room, we found nothing but dust and shadows, until Mortensen called out, "Scott, over here." In the corner of what seemed to be the living room was a trapdoor. It was partially hidden under a rotting rug, and judging by the dust around it, it hadn't been disturbed in a long time. We pried it open and were met with a set of rickety wooden stairs leading down into darkness. "Stay sharp," Mortensen whispered, and we descended into the unknown. The basement was cold and damp, the air thick with mildew. We swept the room with our flashlights and saw that it was filled with old crates and boxes. But in the far corner, there was something that made my blood run cold. An altar. It was crude, made of stone and wood, with strange symbols carved into it. Around it were scattered bones, some animal, but others disturbingly human. "This isn't good," Mortensen muttered. "We need to get the others." We hurried back to the ranger station and relayed what we'd found. The atmosphere grew tense as we discussed our next move. Reyes suggested we wait until morning to investigate further, but Mortensen was adamant. "Whatever's happening, it's happening now. We need to act fast." We decided to head back to the cabin, this time with the whole team. It was getting dark, and the forest seemed to close in around us as we made our way back. The cabin looked even more ominous in the fading light, its shadow stretching out like a dark stain. Inside, we descended the stairs again, our flashlights piercing the gloom. We spread out, examining the altar and the surrounding area. Tommy was the first to notice it, a small hidden compartment under the altar. He pried it open, revealing a journal, its pages yellowed with age. As we leafed through it, we realized it was a detailed account of rituals and sacrifices, written in a mix of English and some older, unrecognizable language. The last entry was particularly chilling. It spoke of summoning something, a creature that dwelled in the forest, hungry for human souls. "Guys, we need to leave," I said, a sense of urgency creeping into my voice. But it was too late. From above, we heard a noise, a low, guttural sound that sent a chill down my spine. We rushed up the stairs, weapons ready, but what we saw froze us in our tracks. Standing in the doorway was a figure, tall and gaunt, with pale, almost translucent skin. Its eyes were hollow, empty voids that seemed to suck in the light. It moved with an unnatural grace, stepping into the cabin without a sound. "Back away slowly," Mortensen ordered. But the thing was faster. It lunged at Reyes, its hand a blur. We opened fire, the sound of gunshots deafening in the confined space. The creature staggered, but didn't fall. It slashed at Reyes, who screamed in agony as he went down, blood gushing from a wound in his side. "Fall back," I yelled, dragging Reyes toward the stairs. We retreated, firing as we went, but the thing was relentless. We barely made it out of the cabin with Mortensen and Tommy covering our escape. Once outside, we regrouped, panting and shaking. Reyes was in bad shape, and we knew we had to get him medical attention fast. But as we started to move, we heard more noises, rustling in the underbrush, shadows flitting between the trees. "We need to get back to the ranger station," Mortensen said, his voice grim. We half ran, half carried Rise through the forest, the darkness pressing in around us. The sounds of pursuit grew closer, more distinct. We fired blindly into the trees, trying to keep whatever was following us at bay. By the time we reached the ranger station, we were exhausted and terrified. We barricaded the doors and windows, setting up a defensive perimeter. Reyes was fading fast, his breathing shallow. Tommy did his best to patch him up, but we all knew it was a losing battle. As the night wore on, the sounds outside grew louder, more insistent. We could hear them, the creatures, moving around the building, scratching at the walls, trying to get in. "This can't be happening," Marco muttered, his face pale. "What the hell are those things?" "Doesn't matter," Mortensen said, his jaw set. "We hold the line. We survive till morning." But dawn seemed an eternity away. Just before sunrise, there was a final assault. The creatures attacked with renewed ferocity, breaking through the barricades. We fought them off, but it was chaos. In the melee, Mortensen went down, one of the creatures tearing into him with savage fury. Marco and I managed to drag his body inside, but he was gone. By the time the first light of dawn broke through the trees, the creatures had retreated, leaving us battered and broken. Reyes was dead, Mortensen too. Only Tommy, Marco, and I were left, and we were barely hanging on. We made our way back to Tillamook, each step a struggle. The townspeople stared at us, their faces a mix of horror and pity. Sheriff Dobbins met us, his expression grim. "What happened?" he asked. I told him everything, sparing no details. He listened in silence, then nodded. "I'll take care of it. You boys did your best." In the aftermath, there were no answers. The disappearances stopped, but the town was left with an unspoken fear. Even now, years later, I can't forget the eyes of that creature, the emptiness that seemed to swallow everything. And every time I close my eyes, I hear the rustle of leaves and wonder if one day it will come for me too. My name is Walter Lopez, and back in 2015, something happened to me near Banff, Alberta. Being a member of the Cree Nation, I've always felt more at home among the trees than anywhere else. I suppose that's what I get for preferring the company of squirrels over people. Less drama, more nuts. That summer, I decided to take a solo hiking trip into the Rockies. It wasn't my first time trekking alone. I'd been navigating those trails since I was old enough to tie my own boots. Friends used to joke that I could find my way out of a forest faster than they could find their cars in a parking lot. I always laughed it off, telling them that trees don't move, but good luck convincing a parking lot to stay the same for 5 minutes. I set out early one morning, the sun just beginning to peek over the mountain peaks. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and earth. My backpack was loaded with the essentials: water, trail mix, a map, and a sense of overconfidence that could rival a teenager's. If arrogance were a compass, I'd never get lost. About 3 hours into the hike, I reached a fork in the trail. The left path led toward a well-known lookout point frequented by tourists and amateur photographers. The right path was less traveled, overgrown with brush and barely visible. Naturally, I chose the path that screamed bad idea, louder than a horror movie soundtrack. I thought to myself, what's the worst that could happen? A question that, in retrospect, is the universal cue for things to go south. As I pushed through the dense foliage, the forest grew quieter. The usual sounds of birds chirping and leaves rustling seemed to fade away. It was as if the woods were holding their breath. I shrugged it off, attributing it to the thickness of the trees muffling the sounds. Besides, silence is golden, right? Or at least, that's what I told myself to ignore the growing unease in my gut. After another hour, I stumbled upon a small clearing. In the center stood a dilapidated cabin, weathered by time and swallowed by vines. It wasn't on any map I had, and trust me, I checked. Curiosity got the better of me because, really, who wouldn't want to explore a creepy abandoned cabin in the middle of nowhere? If life were a horror movie, I'd be the guy who investigates the strange noise in the basement. I approached the cabin cautiously. The wooden steps creaked under my weight, threatening to give way. The door was ajar, revealing darkness inside. I took out my flashlight and stepped in. The interior was sparse, a broken table, a rusted stove, and walls adorned with claw marks. "Nice decor," I mumbled. "Real homey." As I scanned the room, my light caught something on the floor. Tracks. They were unlike anything I'd ever seen. Too big to be a wolf, too clawed to be a bear. I knelt down to get a closer look. The print resembled that of a massive feline, but was distorted, as if whatever made it had more toes than it should. "Well, that's not in any field guide," I muttered. A sudden noise outside made me jump, a rustling of leaves followed by a low, guttural sound. I froze, every muscle tense. Great. Probably just a raccoon auditioning for a jump scare, I thought, attempting to steady my nerves. I slowly stood up and peered out the grimy window. At first, I saw nothing but the swaying branches. Then movement caught my eye. Emerging from the tree line was a creature unlike any I'd encountered. It moved with the stealth of a mountain lion, but stood taller than a grizzly bear on its hind legs. Its body was sleek yet muscular, covered in dark, matted fur. The head resembled that of a wolf, but with elongated jaws and too many teeth crammed into its maw. Its eyes were fixed on the cabin. On me. "Okay. Time to go," I whispered, my heart pounding like a drum solo. I backed away from the window, careful not to make a sound. My mind raced. The cabin had one door and no back exit, a classic design flaw when you're trying to escape unidentified monsters. I cursed under my breath, wishing I'd taken that left path to the scenic overlook instead. The creature began circling the cabin, its footsteps heavy yet eerily controlled. I could hear its claws scraping against the wooden exterior. Desperate, I looked for anything that could serve as a weapon. My eyes landed on a rusted fire poker near the stove. Better than nothing, I thought, grabbing it and positioning myself near the door. Suddenly, the scratching stopped. The silence was deafening. I held my breath, straining to hear any sign of movement. Then, with a force that shook the entire cabin, the creature slammed into the door. The hinges groaned but held. "That's one sturdy door," I noted wryly, though I doubted it could withstand another hit. The second impact shattered the doorframe, wood splintering as the door flew inward. The creature stood in the doorway, its form filling the space. Up close, the stench hit me, a mix of wet dog and decaying flesh. "Ever heard of a bath?" I quipped, raising the fire poker defensively. It lunged at me, swiping with a massive clawed paw. I dodged to the side, feeling the air ripple where its claws had been. Adrenaline surged through me. "So this is how I die," flashed briefly in my mind, but I pushed the thought away. I wasn't about to become the punchline of my own bad joke. I swung the fire poker, striking the creature's arm. It let out a howl, not of pain, but of irritation, like I'd merely poked it with a stick. "Well, that didn't work," I muttered. It advanced again, and I knew I had to think fast. Spotting a window to my left, I made a split-second decision. I threw the fire poker at the creature's face, not to harm it, but to distract it for a precious moment. As it raised an arm to deflect the makeshift missile, I bolted toward the window. Without hesitation, I leaped through the glass. The world became a blur of shattered shards and whipping branches as I tumbled onto the ground outside. Ignoring the cuts and the sting of fresh wounds, I scrambled to my feet. Behind me, the creature roared in frustration. I sprinted toward the tree line, adrenaline fueling my legs. The dense forest that once felt like home now twisted into a labyrinth of obstacles. Every root and fallen branch seemed intent on tripping me up. Nature's not on my side today, I thought grimly. The sound of heavy footsteps crashed behind me. The creature was in pursuit, and it was fast. Too fast. Ahead, I spotted a steep incline, a rocky hill that led down to a river. Better than becoming lunch, I decided. Without breaking stride, I flung myself down the slope. Rocks shifted underfoot, and I half ran, half slid toward the rushing water below. Behind me, the creature hesitated at the top, perhaps uncertain of the unstable terrain. Reaching the riverbank, I didn't pause to consider the temperature or the current. I plunged into the icy water, the shock stealing the breath from my lungs. The river's flow was swift, pulling me downstream. I surfaced, gasping, and caught a glimpse of the creature, pacing along the bank, unable or unwilling to follow. "Guess you don't like swimming," I sputtered, a flicker of relief mingling with the cold. The river carried me around a bend, and the creature disappeared from sight. After what felt like hours but was probably mere minutes, I managed to grasp an overhanging branch and pull myself to shore. Shivering, I took stock of my situation. I was miles from civilization, soaked and weaponless, with an unidentified predator on the loose. I've had better days, I joked weakly. I needed to get back to the main trail. If I could find it, I could follow it back to the trailhead and my truck. With any luck, the creature would lose interest, but given my track record, luck wasn't exactly my middle name. As I made my way through the forest, the daylight began to fade, the temperature dropped, and the sounds of the nocturnal forest emerged. Every rustle and snap put me on edge. Maybe I should have taken up knitting instead, less chance of being eaten by yarn. Then, in the distance, I heard voices. Human voices. Pushing through the underbrush, I emerged onto a campsite where a group of hikers had set up tents around a fire. They looked up in surprise as I stumbled into their midst, bedraggled and bleeding. "Whoa, buddy, you okay?" one of them asked, standing up. "Depends on your definition of okay," I replied. "But if you've got a phone or a way out of here, I'd be forever grateful." They ushered me to the fire, offering a blanket and hot coffee. I explained what had happened, omitting the more unbelievable details. "Something big chased me," I said. "Could be a bear, or something else." One of the hikers, a lanky guy with glasses, frowned. "There aren't any bears reported in this area," he said, "and certainly nothing that matches that description." "Well, whatever it was, it's out there, and it's not friendly," I insisted. An older woman in the group nodded slowly. "I've heard stories from the locals," she said. "Legends of creatures that guard these woods. Most people dismiss them as myths." "Great. I'm being hunted by a myth," I sighed. "Just my luck." They agreed to help me get back to the trailhead. As we packed up their camp, a chilling howl echoed through the trees. The group exchanged uneasy glances. "Tell me that was your stomach," I joked weakly to the lanky guy. We moved quickly, sticking together. The path back was eerily quiet, and the darkness pressed in around us. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see glowing eyes staring back. Suddenly, a scream pierced the night. One of the hikers at the rear was gone. We spun around, shining flashlights into the forest. The beam caught a glimpse of the creature dragging the unfortunate hiker into the shadows. Panic erupted. "We have to help him," someone shouted. "With what?" I snapped. "We have no weapons, and that thing is not messing around." A horrifying shriek cut through the air race, followed by a sickening silence. We stood frozen, the reality sinking in. "We need to keep moving," the older woman urged. "Now." We broke into a run, the path twisting under our feet. The sounds of pursuit crashed behind us, branches snapping, heavy footfalls gaining ground. Ahead, I spotted the glimmer of lights. "The parking lot! There!" I shouted. We burst out of the tree line, racing toward the vehicles. Fumbling with keys, we piled into the nearest car. The engine roared to life, and we sped away just as the creature emerged from the woods, watching us with predatory eyes. We didn't stop until we reached the nearest town. At the local ranger station, we reported what had happened. Authorities organized a search party, though their skeptical glances made it clear they doubted our story. Days later, news broke that a hiker had been found mauled near the area we described. Officials attributed it to a bear attack, cautioning people to stay on designated trails. I knew better. Bears don't walk on two legs or have faces that blend the worst features of wolves and nightmares, but there was no point in arguing. In the aftermath, I did some digging. Local legends spoke of a guardian beast, a protector of the land, angered by trespassers. They called it the Mia, named after the wild spirit of the mountains. Whatever it was real, and it was out there. The fog was thicker than I'd expected. I pulled my RV into a secluded clearing in Pisgah National Forest and stepped out into the damp air, the smell of wet earth heavy in my nose. Everything was muffled, as if the forest were holding its breath. The trees were shrouded in mist, their trunks fading into the gloom, and the trail I'd heard so much about was hidden somewhere out there waiting for me. I'd come here to find something unique. My vlog had been stagnating, and I needed a fresh angle. A fellow hiker had mentioned an unmarked trail, a path that didn't appear on any maps. One locals swore disappeared and reappeared as if it had a life of its own. Perfect. If I could document it, film the mystery, my audience would eat it up. I grabbed my camera, set it up, and filmed a quick introduction. Hey everyone, it's Nate here, and I'm in the middle of the misty Pisgah National Forest, about to track down the infamous Vanishing Trail. Legend says this path comes and goes, and people who wander too far down it don't come back. Let's see if that's true. I packed up my gear and set off into the fog. The forest was silent, the only sound my boots crunching on damp leaves. I had a GPS in my pocket just in case, but I didn't plan to use it unless things got really bad. I wanted to go off the grid, find this mysterious trail, and see if there was anything to the rumors. I'd always been a skeptic. Ghost stories and folklore were fun to tell around a campfire, but not much else. As I walked, the fog thickened, swallowing the trees. It clung to my skin, cold and heavy. It wasn't long before I found the first strange marker. A stone slab jutting from the ground, its surface covered in spiraling symbols that didn't resemble any language I knew. I filmed it, talking into the camera as I described the find. This looks like something from an old burial ground, but there's no mention of this on any maps. Really makes you wonder what else is out here, hidden beneath the fog. I kept moving. The trees closed in tighter, and the trail became fainter, more overgrown. Soon, it was little more than a game trail, barely wide enough to follow. I pushed forward, keeping the camera rolling, but after another hour of hiking, the trail simply disappeared. One moment there had been a clear path, now it was gone, swallowed by the forest. I checked my GPS, but the signal flickered weakly. The screen showed I was in the middle of nowhere, no path, no landmarks, just a blank screen with a blinking dot. Me. Alone. In the fog. Okay, I muttered, you've dealt with worse. I turned back the way I'd come, but the forest looked different now. The trees seemed closer together, the undergrowth was denser. The fog was disorienting, and I had to rely on instinct to retrace my steps. The GPS was useless. I kept walking, scanning the ground for signs of the trail, but there was nothing. I was starting to feel uneasy. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, not mine. I froze. The sound came from deeper in the forest. Slow, deliberate footsteps crunching on the leaves. I turned, scanning the fog, but there was nothing, just the swirling mist. Then out of the gloom, a figure emerged. An older man, his clothes tattered and damp, his eyes wide and vacant. Hey, I called, my voice echoing through the stillness. You lost too? The man looked at me for a moment, then shuffled forward. He seemed off. His clothes were torn, his face pale, and there was a distant look in his eyes, like he wasn't entirely there. I've been walking for days, he said, his voice hoarse. The trail, it keeps changing. Are you okay? I asked, stepping toward him. He shook his head. No one's okay out here. I frowned, feeling a cold knot of fear tighten in my stomach. What do you mean? The trail. It moves. I've seen it, watched it disappear and reappear. It's not just a path. It's the forest. It doesn't want us to leave. I stared at him, my mind racing. This guy was either delirious or onto something. Either way, I didn't like the way he was talking. Look, I have a GPS, I said, pulling it out. We can find our way back. The man glanced at the GPS, then back at me. It won't help. The forest is messing with it. I didn't believe him. I couldn't. I was a rational guy, and this was just a forest. I'd get us back to my RV, get this guy some help, and be done with it. But as we walked, things got stranger. The mist thickened, wrapping around the trees like a living thing. The forest seemed to shift with every step. What had been an open path a moment ago would be choked with brambles. When I looked back, trees seemed to loom closer, twisting into unfamiliar shapes. The man, whose name I learned was Eli, grew more agitated with every passing minute. It's watching us, he muttered. It knows we're here. Who's watching? I asked, growing impatient. The forest, he said, his voice barely a whisper. It's alive, and it's been here long before we were. I ignored him, focusing on the GPS, but even that was failing me. The screen flickered, the signal cutting in and out. At one point, it showed me standing on a clear path, but when I looked up, there was nothing but trees. Thick, twisted trees that looked like they had grown there for centuries. We kept walking, the fog growing thicker, pressing in on us. The air felt heavy, almost suffocating, and the whispers started. Faint at first, like the wind through the leaves, but then more distinct, voices calling out from the mist. Nate, I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. Did you hear that? I asked Eli. He nodded, his eyes wide. It's calling us. The forest. I tried to shake it off, tell myself it was just the wind, but deep down, I knew that wasn't true. The voice had spoken my name. We came across a backpack tangled in the branches of a tree high above our heads. It was old, covered in dirt and torn, but when I climbed up to retrieve it, I found fresh supplies inside, water, food like someone had packed it yesterday. A chill ran down my spine. How had it gotten there? Eli was growing more paranoid, his eyes darting around like he expected the trees to come alive at any moment. "We need to leave," he kept saying, "before it's too late." We pushed forward, but no matter which direction we went, we ended up back where we started. The fog seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. The whispers grew louder. Then, without warning, Eli was gone. I turned around and he was just gone. The forest had swallowed him whole without a sound. I called out his name, but there was no response, only the dense mist pressing in on me. Panic set in. I was alone, lost in a forest that didn't want me to leave. The GPS was useless, and my camera was flickering, showing distorted footage of things I hadn't seen. Shadows moving in the trees, figures lurking just out of sight. I started running, my breath coming in sharp gasps. The trees twisted and shifted around me. The fog was so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet ahead. Every time I thought I'd found a way out, the forest closed in, trapping me in a maze of branches and brambles. The whispers were louder now, calling my name over and over. My camera caught glimpses of movement, dark figures moving through the mist, vanishing before I could focus on them. I didn't know what was real anymore. The forest seemed to warp around me, bending reality to its will. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the fog broke. I stumbled out of the trees and found myself back at my RV. The mist lingered at the edge of the forest, but it didn't follow. I didn't wait. I grabbed my keys, threw my gear into the RV, and drove, my hands shaking on the wheel. Back home, I reviewed the footage. Eli wasn't in it. It was like he had never existed. But deep down, I knew the truth. The forest had let me leave, but it hadn't forgotten me, and I had a feeling it was waiting, somewhere in the mist, for me to return. My name's Lucas Reed, and in the summer of 2022, I decided to take an RV trip to Wind Cave National Park, a vast and rugged place in South Dakota known for its extensive cave system and remote, empty landscape. I had recently gone through a rough breakup, and this trip was supposed to be my way of getting away from it all, finding a bit of peace and maybe a little solitude. The plan was simple. Drive my RV into the depths of the park away from the handful of other campers and just disconnect for a few days. Maybe see some wildlife, make a few bad jokes with a couple of beers, and catch up on sleep. The breakup had left me in a kind of fog, like I was missing parts of myself. So yeah, this trip was supposed to be therapy. I'd always been an early riser, so the first morning I brewed a pot of coffee, grabbed my camping stove, and headed outside to set up breakfast. The morning was beautiful, the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the world has decided to leave you alone for a while. I set up my camp chair near a small clearing and pulled out some eggs and bacon, already imagining the scent filling the crisp air. That's when I saw him. A lanky guy in a worn leather jacket stood by the tree line, watching. I gave him a casual nod, trying not to think much of it. After all, it was a public park. He had every right to be there. But he didn't nod back. He just stood there, fixed in place. A sense of unease crept in, but I brushed it off and focused on my breakfast. The guy didn't move for a good 5 minutes. Finally, when I glanced over again, he was gone. I figured maybe he was out hiking early and had happened to stumble upon my camp, but the fact that he'd been watching in total silence lingered in my mind. I made a mental note of it, finished my breakfast, and decided to take a small hike before it got too warm. There were trails around here that led to the lesser-known parts of the park, the kind that didn't have tourists bustling about with cameras. I wanted quiet. But the hike didn't turn out to be what I'd hoped. About a mile down the trail, I had that prickling feeling you get when someone's behind you. I stopped, listening, to the wind rustling through the trees, the birds, the distant sound of running water, and then I heard it. Footsteps. I froze, scanning the trees. And that's when I saw him again, the man from the tree line, following me at a distance, just close enough that I could see the glint of metal at his hip. He was staring right at me. No attempt at hiding. "Hey," I called out, raising a hand. "Lost?" No answer. just those dark, expressionless eyes fixed on me. He didn't seem fazed or embarrassed at being caught. If anything, he looked more determined. For a second, I thought maybe he was a ranger, maybe about to tell me I'd wandered off a marked trail or something. But he didn't have a uniform. No park badge, just that jacket, which looked like it had seen a few too many nights out in the cold. I turned back, quickening my pace without looking over my shoulder again, but the hairs on my neck told me he was still there, shadowing my every step. By the time I reached my RV, my pulse was racing, and all that serene, peaceful escape I had come for felt like a joke. I locked myself inside and stood by the window, peering through the blinds. At first, there was nothing, and I started to think maybe I'd overreacted. But then, just as I was about to turn away, I saw him, standing right at the edge of my campsite, perfectly still, staring at my RV. His stance was unnervingly relaxed, like he was waiting for me to come back out. The day passed in tense, silent hours. I didn't dare leave the RV, and he didn't move from his spot. Every so often, he'd walk a slow circle around my site, like a predator stalking its prey. At one point, I called out to him again, hoping to break whatever strange, silent game he was playing. "Hey, man, if this is some kind of joke, it's not funny. You need help or something?" Nothing, not a word, just that same unnerving stare. As the sun began to dip below the trees, painting the landscape in long, dark shadows, I felt a pang of dread. I'd heard stories about people going missing in national parks, stories that usually didn't end well. The ranger station was miles away, and I had no cell service out here. I was on my own, and so was he. The tension broke when he finally moved again, striding right up to the RV door. My heart slammed in my chest. I locked eyes with him through the small window, and for the first time I saw the faintest hint of a smirk on his face. A knife glinted in his hand. I grabbed the nearest thing within reach, a cast iron skillet, which I had to admit wasn't exactly a weapon of choice, but it was all I had. My mind raced with plans to escape. The keys were in the ignition, but he was between me and the door. I could ram the skillet against the window, scream, try to scare him off, but something told me he wasn't the type to get scared. Then, with a suddenness that made my skin crawl, he started banging on the RV door. Each thud was like a countdown, telling me he'd break in, and once he did, there'd be no one to stop him. I thought back to my childhood, my dad telling me that if someone ever broke in, you never let them get you to a second location. You fight no matter what. I had to do something, but he'd come prepared. Scared. Hadn't. The banging stopped, and everything went quiet. Too quiet. I held my breath, listening for any sign of him moving, anything at all. Then, a soft click. He was picking the lock. Before I had time to react, the door flung open. The skillet in my hand felt absurdly small. He took a step inside, his face inches from mine, that smirk never faltering. "You don't have a weapon, do you?" His voice was low, mocking. I swung the skillet as hard as I could, landing a blow to his shoulder. He staggered but barely flinched. He lunged toward me, and I dodged, but only just. The knife sliced through my jacket sleeve, a hot sting following close behind. I didn't have time to think. I bolted out of the RV, taking off into the darkness with nothing but my instinct driving me. Branches clawed at my face, rocks tore at my shoes, but I didn't stop. Behind me, I heard him. His footsteps, heavy and fast, closing the distance. I threw a glance over my shoulder and nearly tripped. He was right there, barely 10 feet away, his knife glinting in the pale moonlight. There was only one thing left to do. I veered off the trail, leaping down a rocky incline that led deeper into the woods. I heard him stumble, cursing. And then he was after me again, crashing through the brush like a bull. My lungs burned, my legs screamed for mercy, but I couldn't stop. Then, I saw it. A small clearing ahead, bathed in moonlight, and just beyond it, the silhouette of a cabin. I didn't know if it was occupied or abandoned, but I ran for it, praying someone was inside. I reached the door, pounding on it with the last of my strength. "Help! Please!" The door creaked open, revealing an older man. His face was shadowed and rough, like he'd been living out here a long time. He took one look at me, then past me at the man in pursuit, and without a word he pulled me inside and slammed the door shut. The two of us stood there, listening. The footsteps stopped outside. Silence hung heavy in the air, and then a slow, scraping sound along the cabin's walls. The old man handed me a rifle, his face set in grim determination. We didn't exchange words. There was no need. We waited, tense, breathless. The footsteps circled the cabin. Then, just as suddenly as it had started, the noise stopped. The old man looked at me, nodded, and whispered, "He'll be back. Back, but not tonight. He always comes back." When I finally made it back to my RV at dawn, my hands were shaking. The man was gone, leaving nothing but footprints in the dirt. But I knew he'd return. As I pulled away from the campsite, I caught one last glimpse of the old man's cabin disappearing behind the trees, his words echoing in my head. The old man was right. This wasn't the end. My name is Felix Zhao, and back in 2015, I found myself in the dense forests of Olympic National Park in Washington State. I'd always been a city guy, but after my divorce, I thought some fresh air might do me good. So I packed my gear and headed out for what I hoped would be a peaceful week of hiking and maybe finding myself along the way. I arrived at the park on a crisp Monday morning. The towering evergreens and the scent of pine were a welcome change from the exhaust fumes and blaring horns of Seattle. As I hoisted my backpack, I couldn't help but chuckle at myself. Felix, I thought, a middle-aged man trying to play Bear Grylls. What's next? Wrestling a cougar? Little did I know how ironic that thought would be. The first day was uneventful. I set up camp near a bubbling stream, fumbled with my tent poles like a novice, and eventually got everything in order. That evening, I sat by the fire, roasting a marshmallow on a stick. It burned to a crisp almost instantly. Well, that's one way to cut calories, I muttered, tossing the charred lump aside. The next morning, I decided to hike deeper into the forest. The trail was less worn here, and the sounds of nature grew louder as the noises of other hikers faded away. Birds chirped overhead, and somewhere in the distance, I heard the faint rush of a waterfall. It felt good to be away from it all. Around midday, I stumbled upon an old cabin, seemingly abandoned. Its wooden frame was covered in moss, and the windows were clouded with grime. Curiosity got the better of me. Maybe I'll find a treasure map or at least an old bottle of moonshine, I joked to myself. Pushing the creaky door open, I stepped inside. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light breaking through the cracked walls. An old table sat in the center, covered with yellowed newspapers dating back decades. One headline caught my eye. "Local hunter disappears without a trace." I shuddered, but shrugged it off. Probably just got lost. Happens to the best of us, I mused. As I turned to leave, I noticed strange claw marks etched into the wooden doorframe. They were deep, and the wood looked freshly gouged. Must be a bear around, I thought. Great, just what I need. That evening, I set up camp a good distance away from the cabin. The sun was setting, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink. I was boiling some water for instant noodles when I heard a rustling in the bushes behind me. "Deer, please be a deer," I whispered. Suddenly, a rabbit darted out, scurrying past my campsite. I laughed, relief washing over me. "Jumpier than a cat in a room full of rocking chairs," I said aloud, shaking my head. But the relief was short-lived. Minutes later, the rustling returned, louder this time. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it toward the noise. The beam caught a glimpse of something moving. Something big, too big to be a deer. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. No response, just the sound of heavy breathing. I remembered the claw marks and felt a knot tighten in my stomach. "So much for a peaceful retreat," I muttered. I decided to keep the fire going all night, adding more wood than necessary. The forest around me grew quiet, unnaturally quiet. Even the crickets had ceased their chirping. Sleep didn't come easy, but exhaustion eventually pulled me under. I awoke to the sound of snapping twigs. The fire had died down to embers, casting eerie shadows around the campsite. Peering out of my tent, I saw nothing at first. Then on the edge of the clearing, I spotted it. A silhouette, hunched and massive. It moved with a predatory grace, muscles rippling under matted fur. The creature stood on all fours, but its back was arched, and its limbs were disproportionately long, like those of a hyena but far more robust. Its head turned in my direction, and even without clear light, I felt its gaze lock onto me. My heart pounded in my chest. "Stay calm, Felix," I whispered. "It's just an animal. Maybe it's more scared of you than you are of it." Somehow, I doubted that. I reached slowly for my backpack and, remembering the flare gun I'd packed at the last minute, a Christmas gift from my brother who joked that I'd need it if I ever got lost or wanted to start a party in the woods. The creature began to advance, each step deliberate and silent. As it moved into a sliver of moonlight, I saw its face, an elongated snout like a wolf, but with patches of bare skin revealing raw flesh beneath. Saliva dripped from its jaws, and its ears were torn and ragged. Time to go, I decided. Clutching the flare gun, I burst out of the tent and fired toward the beast. The flare shot out with a hiss, illuminating the clearing in a red glow. The creature recoiled, emitting a low, guttural sound that vibrated in my bones. Without looking back, I sprinted into the trees, branches whipping against my face. Behind me, I heard the creature give chase, its heavy footsteps pounding the earth. Come on, Felix, move those legs, I urged myself. In my panic, I tripped over an exposed root, crashing hard onto the ground. Pain shot through my ankle. Just perfect, I groaned. Crawling forward, I spotted a fallen branch, thick and sturdy. Grabbing it, I struggled to my feet. The creature emerged from the shadows, its eyes reflecting the faint light. It snarled, revealing teeth sharp enough to tear through flesh with ease. All right, ugly. Let's dance, I said, trying to mask my fear with bravado. It lunged at me, and I swung the branch with all my might, striking its shoulder. It barely flinched. Desperate, I remembered the pocket knife in my cargo pants. Dropping the branch, I fumbled for the knife as the creature circled me. Just then, a loud bang echoed through the forest. Get down, a voice shouted. I didn't need to be told twice. Dropping to the ground, I covered my head. A shot rang out and the creature yelped before retreating into the darkness. I looked up to see a park ranger emerging from the trees, shotgun in hand. You all right? He asked, eyes scanning the perimeter. Do I look all right? I retorted, but relief flooded through me. Thanks for the save. He helped me up, noticing my swollen ankle. Let's get you out of here, he said. It's not safe. No kidding, I replied. What was that thing? He hesitated. We don't know. Been getting reports of hikers going missing, finding remains we can't quite explain. Remains? I echoed, a chill running down my spine. He nodded grimly. Best not to talk about it here. Come on. As we made our way back to his cabin, he told me others had seen the creature, but lived to tell the tale. We call it the Shadow Stalker, he said. Not very original, I know, but it fits. Shadow Stalker? Sounds like a bad comic book villain, I scoffed. He cracked a smile. Yeah, well, if it wears a cape and starts monologuing, I'll be sure to let you know. At the cabin, he bandaged my ankle and offered me a cup of strong coffee. So what's the plan? I asked. At first light, we'll get you to the main station and file a report, he said, but between you and me, not much is being done about it. Why not? He sighed. Budget cuts, bureaucracy, disbelief, you name it. Most folks higher up think it's just wild animal attacks. That was no ordinary animal, I insisted. Tell me about it, he replied, staring into his mug. Morning came, and true to his word, the ranger drove me to the main station. On the way, we passed a group of hikers setting off on a trail. Shouldn't we warn them? I asked. He shook his head. Wouldn't do any good. They wouldn't believe us, and we can't close the park without solid evidence. Frustrated, I decided to take matters into my own hands. After ensuring my ankle was sprained but not broken, I hobbled to the local library. If the creature had been around for a while, maybe there were records, legends, anything that could help. Hours of searching yielded little until I stumbled upon an old journal tucked away in the historical archives. It belonged to a trapper named William Hawthorne from the early 1900s. His entries spoke of a beast that walks like a man but hunts like a wolf, terrorizing the area. One passage stood out. The creature is drawn to those who wander alone, picking them off under the veil of night. Its weakness lies in silver, the metal that mirrors the moon it so craves. Silver, huh, I muttered. Great, because everyone carries silver bullets these days. Just then, an idea struck me. I remembered my late grandfather's antique shop was only a couple of towns over. He left me a box of old trinkets, including a silver letter opener. It wasn't a sword, but it was better than nothing. That evening, armed with the letter opener tucked into my boot and a renewed, if reckless, sense of purpose, I headed back into the forest. Third time's the charm, I joked, though my hands were shaking. I made my way to the area where the creature attacked, leaving markers along the trail to find my way back. Hours passed, and the forest grew darker. Every rustle, every snap of a twig set my nerves on edge. Finally, in a moonlit clearing, I saw it. The creature was hunched over something. No, someone. A hiker's backpack lay torn beside a motionless body. Anger bubbled up inside me. "Hey!" I shouted, stepping into the open. The creature lifted its head, snarling. Blood stained its jaws. It charged at me with terrifying speed. I waited until the last possible moment before sidestepping, slashing out with the silver letter opener. The blade grazed its side, and the creature howled in pain, stumbling. "So, the old man was right," I said, adrenaline coursing through me. It turned to face me again, more furious than before. I knew I had only one shot. As it leaped, I thrust the letter opener forward, aiming for its chest. The impact knocked me backward, the wind leaving my lungs. For a moment, everything was silent. Then the creature let out a guttural cry, staggering before collapsing to the ground. I scrambled to my feet, keeping a safe distance. The creature writhed, its form flickering between beast and something almost human, before finally lying still. Cautiously approaching, I noticed its fur receding, claws retracting. In its place lay a man, middle-aged, with a deep wound where the letter opener had struck. I stared in disbelief. "What are you?" I whispered. Footsteps thundered behind me. The ranger burst into the clearing, shotgun at the ready. He looked from me to the body and sighed heavily. "Well, you did it," he said. "You knew," I accused. "Suspected," he admitted. "But proving a local legend is tricky business." We stood there in silence. "What happens now?" I asked. "Now we make sure this doesn't happen again," he replied. In the days that followed, the official reports stated that a rogue animal had been responsible for the attack, and that it had been put down. The park remained open, the tourists none the wiser. As for me, I returned to Seattle, my quest for peace replaced with a story no one would ever believe. But at least I knew the truth. The creature had once been a man, cursed by forces beyond understanding, doomed to roam the forest in a monstrous form. I don't even know where to start, but this happened a couple of weeks ago when I was camping alone near Big Bear Lake in California. I wasn't planning anything wild. I just wanted some quiet time away from everything. Work stress, noisy neighbors, the whole deal. I figured parking my RV at this quiet campground would be the perfect getaway. I had no idea I'd be fighting for my life. So I got there early on a Friday morning and found this great little spot tucked away near some trees, but not too far from the lake. The campground wasn't full, but there were a few other RVs parked on the other side of the lot, maybe 200 yards away. I liked the space. It felt secluded, but not completely isolated. The first day was great. Hiking, reading, just enjoying the peace and quiet. By nightfall, I was pretty tired, so I locked up everything, double-checked the door to make sure it was secure, and went to bed around 10 p.m. Now here's the thing. I'm a light sleeper, so even the smallest sound can wake me up. That's probably the only reason I'm still alive. Sometime in the middle of the night, I heard this faint scraping noise. At first, I thought it was the wind or maybe an animal brushing up against the RV. I told myself to ignore it and rolled over. But then I heard it again. Louder this time. It sounded like someone trying to jimmy the door open. My stomach dropped. I reached for my phone, but stupid me, I hadn't plugged it in and the battery was dead. I couldn't even use the flashlight app. My actual flashlight was in the front of the RV, so I was stuck in complete darkness. I tried to stay calm, just listening. The sound of metal against metal was unmistakable. Someone was messing with the lock. No doubt about it. My RV isn't fancy or anything, but it's solid, and I always keep it locked up tight. Still, I knew if someone was determined enough, they could break in. I didn't know what to do. My first thought was to yell something. Maybe scare them off. But then I thought, what if it's more than one person? What if yelling just makes it worse? I decided to stay quiet and wait. The noise stopped suddenly, and for a second, I thought maybe whoever it was had given up. Then I heard footsteps, slow and deliberate, walking around the outside of the RV. They stopped near the window by my bed. I swear I could feel someone standing there, staring in, even though the blinds were down. I tried to control my breathing, but my chest felt tight, like I couldn't get enough air. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears. And then I saw the shadow. Through the thin fabric of the blinds, I saw this tall figure standing just outside. They didn't move for what felt like forever. I don't know how I didn't scream. Finally, the figure moved away and I heard them go back to the door. This time, they weren't trying to be quiet. The door handle jiggled violently. Then came the loudest sound yet, the lock snapping. The door swung open and I saw this man standing there, backlit by the faint glow of the moon. He was tall, maybe in his late 40s or early 50s, wearing dark clothes and a baseball cap pulled low over his face. He didn't say anything, just stepped inside, slow and deliberate, like he had all the time in the world. I froze. I didn't even have anything to defend myself with, except the flashlight up front. I forced myself to move, crawling as quietly as I could toward it. My heart felt like it was going to explode. The man didn't notice me at first. He was looking around, maybe making sure no one else was there. When he finally spotted me, I was halfway to the flashlight. "Don't move," he said, his voice low and steady. But I didn't stop. I lunged for the flashlight and swung it as hard as I could, smashing it into his arm. He let out a yell and stumbled back, but instead of running, he reached for something in his pocket. I didn't wait to see what it was. I hit him again, this time in the face, and he finally bolted, running out of the RV and into the woods. I locked the door behind him and sat there, shaking, trying to process what had just happened. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. As soon as the sun came up, I drove straight to the nearest police station. They searched the woods near the campground but came up empty. I still don't know who he was or what he wanted. All I know is that I'm never camping alone again. That's it for today's tale from Shivering Vault. If you have a story worth sharing, drop it in the comments or send it our way. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your fellow thrill seekers. As always, the Shivering Vault thanks you for unlocking today's tale. Until next time, the vault awaits your return. My name is Kai Walker, and back in 2018, I decided to take a much-needed break in the vast expanse of the Yukon Territory's Kluane National Park. As a freelance photographer, I'd spent years chasing deadlines and cityscapes, and I craved the isolation only the wild could offer. So I packed up my RV and set off, eager for a solitary adventure amid glaciers and mountain peaks. The park was everything I hoped for. Towering mountains capped with snow, turquoise lakes reflecting the sky, and an endless horizon that made me feel both insignificant and profoundly alive. I set up camp near a secluded spot by the Duke River, far from the designated camping areas. It was early June, and the days were long, stretching sunlight well into the evening. On my second day, while hiking along a lesser-known trail, I met a fellow traveler named Mark Hastings. He was in his late 40s with a rugged beard and a friendly demeanor. We bonded over our shared love for the outdoors and decided to fish together that afternoon. As we cast our lines into the clear river, he shared stories of his travels through Canada's wilderness, each tale more adventurous than the last. "Ever been up to the glaciers?" Mark asked, reeling in a catch. "Not yet," I replied. "Planning to head that way tomorrow. They say the view is unmatched." He nodded. "Be careful up there. Terrain can be tricky, and weather changes fast." As evening approached, we parted ways. He was heading back to his campsite a few miles upstream, and we made vague plans to meet again. I returned to my RV, cooked a simple meal, and settled in with a book. The silence of the wilderness was a balm to my urban-weary soul. The next morning, I decided to explore the area near the glaciers as planned. The hike was strenuous but rewarding. The air was crisp, and the landscape shifted from dense forest to rocky inclines dotted with wildflowers. By midday, I reached a vantage point that offered a breathtaking view of the ice fields. While setting up my camera for a panoramic shot, I noticed something unusual through the lens, a flicker of movement far off across the glacier. Zooming in, I saw what looked like a group of people trekking, which was odd given the remoteness of this area. They moved in a staggered line, hauling large backpacks. Curiosity piqued, I decided to get a closer look. As I descended toward the glacier, I stumbled upon a narrow path that seemed to lead in their direction. The trail was marked with fresh footprints and grooves, as if heavy equipment had been dragged through recently. An uneasy feeling settled in my stomach, but I brushed it off as overactive imagination. About an hour later, I came across a small makeshift camp tucked into a hollow between ice formations. There were tents camouflaged with white tarps, crates stacked haphazardly, and the faint smell of diesel fuel in the air. Hiding behind a ridge, I observed the scene. Men were unloading containers and carrying them into a crevasse that seemed to open into the glacier itself. Suddenly, a hand clapped on my shoulder. I spun around to face Mark, his expression stern. "What are you doing here?" He whispered harshly. "I could ask you the same," I retorted, confusion mixing with alarm. "You shouldn't be here, Sean. This isn't a place for tourists," he said, his eyes darting nervously back toward the camp. Before I could respond, voices echoed from the camp. A group of men was heading our way, speaking in hushed tones. Mark grabbed my arm and pulled me behind a boulder. "Listen to me carefully," he said urgently. "These people are dangerous. You need to leave now." "Who are they? What's going on?" I demanded. He hesitated before answering. "They're smugglers, trafficking illegal goods across the border using the glacier tunnels." My heart raced. "Are you involved in this?" "No," he insisted. "I'm with the RCMP, undercover. I've been tracking them for months." The voices grew louder. Shadows stretched as the men approached. Mark pressed a finger to his lips, signaling me to stay silent. Just then, a sharp crack echoed through the air. A gunshot. We both ducked instinctively. Chaos erupted as the smugglers scattered, shouting orders in a mix of languages. Mark pulled a handgun from under his jacket. "Stay behind me," he ordered. Before we could move, 2 men rounded the boulder, rifles raised. Mark fired swiftly, hitting one in the shoulder. The other lunged at him, and they grappled fiercely. I watched in stunned disbelief as they fought, the smuggler's knife glinting dangerously. Seizing a rock from the ground, I struck the attacker on the back of the head. He crumpled, and Mark pushed him aside. "Thanks," he muttered. "We have to destroy their stash and call for backup." We made our way toward the camp cautiously. The area was deserted. The smugglers had either fled or were regrouping. Inside one of the tents, we found crates filled with weapons and packets of white powder, drugs meant for distribution. "Help me with this," Mark said, dousing the crates with gasoline from a nearby canister. We set the camp ablaze, flames licking up toward the sky. The smoke would be a signal, but also a beacon for any remaining smugglers. As we retreated, gunfire erupted again. A bullet whizzed past my ear, and we took cover behind an ice wall. "They're not letting us leave easily," I shouted over the noise. Mark radioed for assistance, but the mountainous terrain interfered with the signal. "We need to get to higher ground." We sprinted toward a ridge, bullets striking the ice around us. Reaching a plateau, Mark tried the radio again. This time, he made contact. "Officer down. Need immediate extraction at Glacier Point," he reported. A helicopter's distant rotor became audible, but the smugglers were closing in. One of them caught up, tackling me to the ground. We struggled, his hands tightening around my throat. Spots danced before my eyes as I gasped for air. Mark intervened, pulling him off me and subduing him with a well-placed blow. "Come on, we're almost there." We reached an open area just as the helicopter appeared over the horizon. Relief was short-lived. A group of smugglers stood between us and rescue. Outnumbered and low on options, we prepared to make a stand. "Any jokes up your sleeve?" I quipped nervously. "Not the best time for stand-up comedy," Mark replied grimly. The smugglers advanced, weapons drawn. Suddenly, the helicopter swooped in low and armed officers rappelled down, engaging the criminals in a swift firefight. Within minutes, the smugglers were apprehended or incapacitated. An officer approached us. "You guys okay?" "Better now," Mark responded. As the scene was secured, I sat on a rock trying to process the whirlwind of events. Bodies were being loaded onto stretchers, some unconscious, others lifeless. The reality of how close I'd come to death settled heavily. "Looks like you got more adventure than you bargained for," Mark said, sitting beside me. "No kidding," I replied. "Next time I want excitement, I'll stick to roller coasters." He chuckled. "Probably safer." Back at the base camp, I was debriefed by authorities. They took my statement and advised me to keep the details confidential due to the ongoing investigation. As evening fell, I finally returned to my RV, exhaustion pulling at every muscle. The following day, I decided to leave the park. The allure of solitude had been overshadowed by the stark dangers I had never imagined. Before departing, I did some research at a local library, curious about the operation I had stumbled upon. I discovered that the smuggling ring had ties to a larger criminal network operating along the Canada-US border. They used remote wilderness areas to move contraband, exploiting the challenging terrain to evade law enforcement. Mark Hastings, whose real name was Agent Marcus Hale, had been instrumental in dismantling several such groups. As I drove away from Kluane National Park, the majestic mountains in my rearview mirror, I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and lingering adrenaline. The open road ahead seemed both inviting and safe, a welcome contrast to the perilous glaciers. In the end, the adventure I had sought had found me in the most unexpected way. I returned to photography with a renewed appreciation for the mundane. As for Agent Hale, he continued his covert work, blending into landscapes where danger lurked beneath the surface. My name's Henry Gonzalez, and in 2019, I took my RV to a spot near Kenai Fjords National Park in Alaska. I'm not a survivalist or a wilderness guide. I'm an accountant from Atlanta who got fed up with numbers and paperwork. So I figured I'd finally hit pause on life and spend a couple of weeks camping. I drove all the way from Georgia, chasing the quiet, thinking Alaska would be the kind of place where I could just sit back with a beer and let my brain go blank for a while. When I parked the RV in this isolated area just outside the national park, it felt perfect. Not a single person around. I was miles from the nearest campground, let alone a neighbor, and to me, that was ideal. I was setting up my little oasis when I noticed a couple of things off the bat that didn't sit right. The first was the absence of wildlife. I mean, it's Alaska, bears, moose, the whole lot. But around me, nothing. No scat on the ground, no broken branches from animals passing by, just silence except for the faint rustling of leaves. By day 3, I'd settled into a good routine. Coffee in the morning, a short hike in the woods, then I'd grill up whatever canned meal I felt like eating. It was on one of these afternoon hikes that I stumbled across an old, half-collapsed wooden cabin. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades. The door was hanging off the hinges, and there was this strange smell around it. A mix of rotting wood and something sharper, kind of metallic. I figured it was rust from some old tool or metal scrap inside, so I brushed it off. But something didn't sit right with me. There were bits of clothing scattered around the area, shirts, old jackets, even a pair of jeans. Looked like they'd been there for years, frayed and faded by the weather. I don't know why, but I felt a chill. Part of me thought I should turn back. But another part, maybe the accountant side that just needs answers, thought I should go inside and take a look around. The interior was even worse. Dirt was caked on every surface. The floor was covered in what looked like animal bones, small ones, maybe birds or rabbits, and that same metallic smell was stronger now. I looked up and noticed something hanging from the ceiling. It was a hook, the kind you'd see in butcher shops. It didn't belong there, not in the middle of a forest. But it was there all the same, swaying slightly as if disturbed by some breeze that I couldn't feel. At that point, I decided to head back to the RV. I figured it was best to keep my distance from whatever strange things were left behind in that place. But when I stepped out of the cabin, I could have sworn I heard footsteps, faint and dragging behind me. I stopped, turned around, and waited. But nothing appeared. The forest around me was dead silent again. Back at the RV, I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself I just psyched myself out. That night, though, I barely slept. I had brought a shotgun with me just in case of wildlife, and I kept it by my side. Every little noise outside felt amplified, like something was creeping around just out of sight. I told myself I was just being paranoid. Morning came, and I felt a bit stupid. I decided to spend the day fishing in a small creek I'd passed earlier, trying to distract myself. But even out by the water, that eerie silence remained. No birds chirping, no fish biting, just the occasional snap of a twig somewhere behind me, which I tried my best to ignore. The thought that maybe I wasn't alone out here crept up more than once, and I started questioning if maybe I'd made a mistake coming out this far. Then, later that evening, as I was grilling up some fish, I caught a glimpse of movement from the corner of my eye, just on the edge of the tree line. I squinted, trying to make out what I was seeing, but all I could make out was a figure. A man, maybe, crouching low, watching me. He was dressed in what looked like layers upon layers of dirty clothes, all torn up and mud-streaked, his face partially obscured by a tangle of hair. He was still as a statue, just watching. I shouted out to him, trying to play it cool, asking if he was lost, but he didn't respond. Instead, he slowly ducked back into the trees, disappearing without a sound. Every instinct told me I needed to pack up and leave. But stubborn as I was, I convinced myself that he was probably just some harmless drifter. I thought if I ignored him, he'd go away. The next night, things escalated. I woke up around 2 a.m. to a scraping noise coming from outside. It was a slow, dragging sound, like something was being pulled along the side of the RV. I froze, gripping the shotgun tighter than ever, listening. The scraping moved along the length of the vehicle, stopping right outside the window next to my bed. I didn't dare look out. For a solid hour, I just lay there, sweating, listening to the faint scratching on the metal. Then, silence. I finally drifted off, hoping I'd imagined the whole thing. But in the morning, when I stepped outside, there were muddy handprints smeared along the side of the RV. That was enough for me. I started packing up my stuff, thinking I'd head back to the main road and find a new spot, maybe closer to a town. But as I loaded the last of my things, I spotted him again, standing a few yards away by a cluster of birch trees, staring at me with this blank, almost curious expression. He was holding a long, rusty blade, one that looked like it had seen far too much use, and his clothes were even filthier than before. I didn't think. I raised the shotgun and aimed at him, shouting for him to stay back. He just smiled, a slow, unsettling grin, and started to walk toward me, dragging that blade along the ground. I fired a warning shot into the air, hoping he'd take the hint, but he kept coming, unfazed, picking up speed. At that moment, I knew I couldn't just wait around. I ran back into the RV, locked the door, and fired up the engine. But the man lunged at the driver's side window, slamming his fist against it, that rusty blade scraping along the glass. I stomped on the gas, swerving as he clung to the side, banging on the window, his face pressed against it with that same terrifying smile. The RV lurched forward, finally throwing him off balance, and I sped down the dirt road, not daring to look back. After what felt like an eternity, I hit the highway, my heart still pounding. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station miles away where I could finally breathe. The police in Anchorage were polite but skeptical. They took down my statement and checked out the muddy handprints on the RV, but all they could offer was a half-hearted promise to patrol the area. They didn't even sound like they believed me. Later, out of curiosity, or maybe just out of fear, I did some digging. I found a couple of stories about a man named Gideon who was known to lurk in those woods. Rumored to be some kind of deranged hermit who'd lived there for decades, people said he'd lost his family in a hunting accident and went off the deep end, becoming obsessed with cleansing the forest of outsiders. My name is Lucas Lopez. I'm 43 years old, and last summer I drove my RV into the heart of the Freetown Fall River State Forest in Massachusetts. I had come to write about the area's infamous reputation, a hotspot for supernatural legends, cult activity, and bizarre phenomena. I didn't believe in any of it. Not really. I was just a writer looking for a good story and something to draw attention to my blog and maybe finally get a real following. After my divorce, I'd thrown myself into work, taking solo trips across the country, chasing oddities and urban legends. This trip wasn't supposed to be any different, but what happened over the next 3 days still haunts me. I arrived late in the afternoon, the sun dipping low behind a canopy of ancient trees. My GPS had failed about 15 minutes earlier, leaving me to navigate the maze-like dirt roads on my own. The deeper I drove, the narrower the paths became, the trees pressing closer, their gnarled branches scraping against the RV like claws. Finally, I found an unmarked pull-off that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Overgrown, uneven, but quiet. Perfect. I parked, grabbed my gear, and stepped outside. The first thing I noticed was the silence. No birds, no rustling leaves, no distant hum of traffic, just stillness, thick and unnatural. It should have been peaceful, but it wasn't. I shook off the unease, telling myself it was just the isolation, and started setting up camp. The trouble began almost immediately. I planned to spend the first evening jotting down notes about the area's history, strange disappearances, stories of ghostly apparitions, rumors of cult rituals in the 1970s. But as I went to plug in my laptop, the RV's backup power refused to work. "Come on," I muttered, fiddling with the connections. Nothing. My phone, too, was useless. No signal, and a battery draining faster than it should have. Annoyed but not panicked, I lit a lantern and set up my notebook instead. Outside, the forest seemed to close in tighter as darkness fell. It started with footsteps. I was sitting by the fire, the warm glow flickering across the trees, when I heard them. Soft, deliberate, like someone walking barefoot on the forest floor. "Hello?" I called, shining my flashlight into the darkness. The beam caught only trees and shadows. The footsteps stopped. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, waiting for some kind of movement, a voice, anything. When nothing came, I convinced myself it was just an animal and returned to the fire. But the unease lingered. The next morning, I decided to explore the trails. I left the RV and followed a faint path that twisted through the woods, marked occasionally by faded red blazes on the trees. The forest was dense, almost suffocating, and the farther I went, the more I felt like I was being watched. Halfway down the trail, I saw something, or someone. A figure stood far ahead, shrouded in the morning mist. It was tall, impossibly still, and cloaked in shadow. "Hey!" I called, my voice echoing back at me. The figure didn't move. I took a step forward, and just like that, it was gone. 1 second there, the next, nothing but empty forest. That night, things escalated. I was sitting by the fire again, trying to shake off the memory of the figure, when a voice whispered my name. "David." I froze, my blood running cold. It wasn't loud, barely more than a breath, but it was unmistakable. "Who's there?" I said, standing and scanning the woods with my flashlight. No answer, just the crackling fire and the suffocating quiet. Then the voice came again, closer this time. "I can help you, David." The fire flickered violently, as if caught in a sudden gust of wind, but the air was still. "What do you want?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "I want to help you," it said, smooth and almost kind. "You've been searching, haven't you? For meaning, for purpose. I can give it to you. All you have to do is ask." I stumbled back into the RV, locking the door behind me. But even there, I didn't feel safe. The next day, I told myself I'd imagined it. Stress, isolation, maybe even gas fumes leaking in the RV. I tried to rationalize it all, but the forest wouldn't let me forget. That afternoon, while hiking, I found strange carvings etched into the trees. Symbols I didn't recognize, some spiraling, others jagged and crude. Around them, the ground was littered with animal bones arranged in deliberate patterns. The air felt heavier there, colder, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched again. That night, the entity revealed itself. I was lying in bed when the RV began to shake, not violently, but enough to make me sit up in alarm. Then I heard it again. The voice. "David, come outside." "No," I whispered, clutching the flashlight like a lifeline. "Come outside," it repeated, more insistent this time. Against every instinct screaming at me to stay inside, I opened the door. It was there, standing at the edge of the firelight. The figure was cloaked, its face obscured by shadows. It was tall, unnaturally so, its presence overwhelming, and though I couldn't see its eyes, I felt them boring into me, heavy with intent. "What do you want?" I croaked. "I can give you what you desire," it said, its voice deep and resonant. "Recognition, success, freedom from your pain. All you have to do is write about me, spread my story, my name." I shook my head, backing away. "No, this is insane." The figure didn't move, but the shadows around it began to shift, coiling like living things. "If you refuse," it said, "you will never leave this forest." I ran. The moment the words left its mouth, I bolted into the woods, not caring which direction I went. My flashlight bobbed wildly, casting fleeting glimpses of trees and shadows. But no matter how far I ran, I kept ending up back at the campsite. Over and over, the same clearing, the same fire pit, the same suffocating dread. The entity was waiting for me each time, silent and patient. Eventually, I collapsed, my body trembling with exhaustion. "I'll do it," I whispered. "I'll write about you." The air shifted immediately, the oppressive weight lifting as the shadows receded. The figure stepped closer, holding out a long, clawed hand. "Write my name," it said, its voice almost gentle now, "and you may go." My hand shook as I scribbled the name it gave me into my notebook. The moment I finished, the figure vanished. and the forest fell deathly silent. I woke the next morning in my RV, parked at the forest's entrance, as if none of it had happened. But my notebook was still there, open to the page where I'd written the name, and I knew deep down that I couldn't ignore what had happened. I published the story on my blog later that week. It went viral almost instantly, drawing thousands of readers from around the world. But strange things started happening after that. Electronics malfunctioned. Readers reported seeing shadows in their homes after reading the post. And sometimes late at night, I hear the voice again, whispering my name. I don't know what I've unleashed, but I know it's not finished with me yet. My name is Julian Erickson, and I'm 44 years old. This happened in late October last year during a trip to Dogtown Commons, an abandoned settlement in Gloucester, Massachusetts. I went there to document its history for a book I was working on about New England's forgotten towns. I thought it would be just another quiet excursion in my RV, a chance to escape the noise of city life and dive into research. I was wrong. Dogtown was the kind of place that clung to the edges of memory and myth. Once a bustling colonial village, it was now a network of overgrown trails, crumbling stone walls, and strange moss-covered boulders. Local legends claimed it was cursed, haunted by the witch Thomasine Younger, who had cursed the land before her death. But I didn't believe in curses or witches. I believed in facts, and I planned to find them. I arrived late in the afternoon, just as the sun was dipping behind the treetops. The sky was heavy with clouds, the light dimming quickly. My RV bumped along the narrow dirt road until I found a clearing big enough to park. The air was damp and cold, and the surrounding woods were eerily quiet. After setting up camp, I grabbed my notepad, a flashlight, and my digital recorder, ready to explore the ruins before dark. But as soon as I turned on the recorder, it sputtered and died. I frowned and checked the batteries. They were brand new. Shrugging it off as a fluke, I grabbed my backup recorder, but it wouldn't power on either. A chill crept up my spine. Maybe it was just the damp air affecting the electronics. At least that's what I told myself. I started down one of the main trails, marked by weathered stones barely visible through the moss and dirt. The forest seemed alive, the trees pressing in around me, their skeletal branches clawing at the sky. The silence was unnerving. No birds, no rustling leaves, just the sound of my boots crunching on the dirt path. Dogtown was famous for its boulders, massive stones engraved with moralistic sayings. As I approached one, the faint outline of carved words caught my attention. Courage. I reached out to brush away the moss when I heard it, the faintest whisper, like someone murmuring just out of earshot. I froze, my hand hovering over the stone. Hello? I called out, my voice sounding too loud in the stillness. No response. I told myself it was the wind and moved on, though my heartbeat quickened with each step. As I ventured deeper, I noticed something strange. A boulder I passed had carvings that didn't match anything I'd seen in my research. The words weren't in English, and they seemed freshly etched as if someone had been there recently. The characters were sharp and jagged, almost angry looking. By the time I returned to the RV, the sky had turned a slate gray, and a thick mist was rolling in. The air felt heavier, the kind of weight that makes it hard to breathe. I set up a small campfire, hoping the light and warmth would steady my nerves. As night fell, the noises began. First, it was faint laughter drifting through the trees like a memory. Then came the footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the RV. I grabbed my flashlight and shone it into the woods. The beam cut through the fog, revealing nothing but gnarled branches and shifting shadows. I tried to ignore it, telling myself it was just animals. But then I saw her. Standing at the edge of the clearing was a figure, a woman cloaked in shadows. She didn't move, didn't make a sound. She just stood there, watching. My breath caught in my throat as I took a step closer, the flashlight trembling in my hand. But when I blinked, she was gone. I didn't sleep that night. The laughter and footsteps continued, growing louder and more insistent as the hours crawled by. When dawn finally came, I felt a mix of relief and dread. I wasn't sure I could handle another like that. Determined to make sense of what was happening, I spent the morning poring over my notes. That's when I found it, a passage about offerings made to Thomasine Younger. The villagers, desperate to appease her spirit, would leave pouches of salt and coins near her home, accompanied by whispered apologies. It sounded ridiculous, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it was the key to ending whatever was happening. I gathered what I needed, a handful of coins from my pocket and some salt from my kitchen supplies, and made my way back into the woods. The mist had thickened, clinging to the ground like a living thing. The paths seemed to shift under my feet, leading me in circles. Finally, I found it, the stone foundation of what must have been Thomasine's house. Kneeling in the dirt, I placed the pouch near the ruins and whispered, "I'm sorry, I mean no harm. Please let me leave." For a moment, everything was still. The mist seemed to lift slightly, and the oppressive weight in the air eased. I let out a shaky breath and stood, ready to head back to the RV. But as I walked, the paths shifted again. The landmarks I'd memorized were gone, replaced by new, unfamiliar terrain. Panic set in as I realized I was lost. Then came the whispers, louder this time, surrounding me. My name echoed through the trees, spoken by voices that didn't belong to anyone I knew. "Stay," a voice said, clear and cold. "You belong here." I turned, and there she was again, the cloaked woman standing just a few feet away. Her face was pale, her eyes dark and empty. She raised a hand pointing at me, and I felt a coldness wash over me, seeping into my bones. I ran. When I reached the RV, I didn't stop to look back. I threw open the door, started the engine, and slammed the accelerator. The RV lurched forward, the tires skidding on the damp ground as I sped down the dirt road. The mist followed, twisting and curling like smoke. In the rearview mirror, I saw her standing in the middle of the road, her figure growing smaller as I put distance between us. But her eyes, they burned into me as if they were still watching. I made it home safely, but Dogtown never left me. Weeks later, I began hearing whispers outside my apartment. Carvings started appearing in the stones near my building, messages eerily similar to the ones I'd seen in Dogtown. I stopped working on the book, unable to relive the experience. Some histories, I've come to realize, are not meant to be uncovered. Some curses can't be escaped, and some places will never let you go. My name is James Lopez. I'm 33 years old, and I used to be a park ranger before I shifted to city planning. I've always been the type to keep a level head under pressure, but that weekend in Ocala National Forest changed the way I see the world and myself forever. It's hard to explain what we encountered without sounding insane, but I'll do my best. This happened in April 2012. My girlfriend Emma, two friends Tyler and Kelly, and I decided to take an RV trip into the heart of Ocala. Emma, 30, has always been an avid nature enthusiast, and the plan of the group was that she'd been itching to show us Alexander Springs, where the water is crystal clear and the trails promise adventure. Tyler, 28, my childhood friend, and Kelly, his girlfriend, were tagging along mostly because they loved camping, though Kelly was more into the safety of RV life than the rugged outdoors. Looking back, I wish I'd trusted Kelly's unease from the start. We arrived at our campsite around mid-afternoon on a Friday, excited to leave behind the noise of the city. The RV, which I'd borrowed from my brother, was parked in a clearing surrounded by towering pines. The air smelled fresh, the kind of scent you can only get deep in the woods. We unpacked quickly, tents for Tyler and Kelly, and Emma and I would use the RV. "See? Perfect," Tyler said, slapping me on the back. "We needed this, man. Get the old crew together." Emma was already wandering the edge of the woods with her camera. "The biodiversity here is incredible," she called back, her voice tinged with excitement. "It's so quiet, though." It was quiet, eerily so. Usually you'd hear birds chirping, insects buzzing, something. Instead, the forest felt like it was holding its breath. I chalked it up to being farther out than usual. That first night was uneventful. We built a fire, roasted marshmallows, and told the same dumb stories Tyler and I had been recycling since we were teenagers. Kelly, however, seemed uncomfortable. She kept glancing over her shoulder and leaning closer to Tyler. "What's up?" I asked her. "Nothing," she muttered. It's so dark out here." "It's the woods, Kel," Tyler said with a grin. "It's supposed to be dark." We laughed it off and went to bed. I didn't know it then, but the forest had already started watching us. The next morning, Emma convinced us to hike a nearby trail. She was thrilled to explore, and I figured it'd be good to stretch our legs. Kelly was reluctant, but joined anyway. We hadn't gone far when Emma froze. She pointed at the ground, a single footprint, barefoot and large. But it wasn't just big. The toes were elongated, tipped with what looked like claw marks. Bear! Tyler guessed. No, Emma said, crouching. Bears don't leave prints like this. Kelly took a step back. Let's just go back. This feels wrong. Relax, Tyler said, brushing it off. It's probably some weird hiker. People are strange out here. Emma shot me a glance, her brows knitted. I nodded for her to keep walking. The hike became more unsettling the farther we went. The quieter the woods got, the occasional snapping of twigs sounding deliberate, like something was following us. Kelly kept muttering that she wanted to turn around, and even Tyler's usual cockiness began to falter. I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. By the time we got back to camp, everyone was tense. We decided to stick close to the RV for the evening. As I gathered firewood near the edge of the clearing, I heard Emma calling my name. James! It was distant, coming from deeper in the woods. I frowned. Emma had been by the fire a minute ago. James, come here! The voice was louder now, insistent. My gut told me something was off, but curiosity won out. I stepped into the tree line. Emma, I called. The voice stopped. I turned back toward camp and nearly collided with Emma herself. Where were you going? She asked, breathless. I heard you, I said, shaken. You were calling me. Her face went pale. I didn't say anything. That night, things got worse. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of movement outside the RV, slow, deliberate footsteps crunching the pine needles. I nudged Emma awake and whispered for her to stay quiet. Peering through the curtain, I spotted a figure near the fire pit. It was humanoid, but wrong. Its limbs were too long, and its posture was bent as though it had been broken and pieced back together. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped out, heart hammering. Who's there? I barked. The figure turned to look at me, and I swear it smiled. Not a friendly smile, but a wide, unnatural grin that made my stomach churn. Before I could react, it darted into the woods with an animalistic speed, leaving no trace. The next morning, we found deep claw marks on the side of the RV and the smoldering remains of our firewood scattered around. Tyler laughed nervously. Okay, so someone's messing with us. Someone? Emma shot back. You think a person did that? It's probably a prank, Tyler insisted. Locals messing with tourists. Kelly wasn't convinced. This isn't normal, Tyler. That thing last night wasn't human. Emma spoke up. There's a Navajo legend about skinwalkers, shapeshifters that take the form of animals or people to deceive you. They can mimic voices, even faces. This isn't the Southwest, Tyler scoffed. That's a desert legend. Legends travel, Emma snapped, and whatever it is, it's here. The argument spiraled until I stepped in. Enough! We're leaving. Pack up, and let's go. As we scrambled to break camp, the forest closed in. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional crack of branches far too close for comfort. Kelly stayed by the RV, clutching her arms as if shielding herself from something unseen. Then we heard it, Tyler's voice calling from the woods. Guys, I found something. Come check it out. We froze. Tyler was right next to me, his face draining of color. Stay here, I said, grabbing a flashlight and stepping into the trees. Tyler followed, despite my protests. The deeper we went, the darker it became. Then we saw it, a figure standing between the pines, its back to us. It looked just like Tyler. Hey, I shouted. The figure turned. Its face, a twisted, grotesque mockery of Tyler's features. Its eyes were too large, its mouth stretched too wide. Before we could react, it let out a guttural, inhuman screech and charged. We bolted back to camp, adrenaline pumping. We're leaving now, I shouted. Everyone piled into the RV as I started the engine. The tires spun in the loose dirt before catching, and we sped down the forest road. But the thing didn't stop. It ran alongside us, its limbs moving in unnatural jerks. Its mouth formed words that weren't quite right. James, it mimicked, its voice distorted. Don't leave. Emma screamed as it slammed against the side of the RV, claws screeching against the metal. Tyler grabbed a hatchet from the supplies and swung wildly at the window, shattering the glass and forcing the creature to fall back. We didn't stop until we reached a ranger station at the edge of the forest, shaking and covered in scratches from the shattered glass. The ranger took one look at us. Around Alexander Springs? He asked. We nodded. He sighed. You're lucky you made it out. We never talked about that trip again. Tyler and I drifted apart after that. and Kelly refused to camp ever again. Emma became obsessed with the legends, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. As for me, I haven't set foot in the woods since. Some places are wild, not because of the animals or terrain, but because something else lives there. Something that watches, waits, and hungers. My name is Jacob Fisher. I'm 35 years old, and this happened just a few months ago, though it feels like a lifetime. I'd been working as a travel nurse for years, moving from city to city, living in the chaos of hospitals and crowded apartments. When I finally took some time off, I decided to embrace solitude. Just me, my RV, and the open road. That's how I ended up in Tate's Hell State Forest in Florida, a place whose name alone should have been a warning. I'd read about the forest's ominous reputation online. Supposedly it was named after a man, Sabi Tate, who wandered the swamp for days under a curse, only to emerge near death and mutter, "My name is Tate, and I've been through hell." Most people dismissed it as folklore, but something about the story intrigued me. It felt like a challenge, a test of my independence and survival skills. I planned to camp there for 3 days, hiking and documenting the experience for my travel blog. I arrived in the late afternoon, just as the sun was beginning to dip below the horizon. The forest was dense with towering pines and sprawling oaks draped in Spanish moss. The air was thick and humid, buzzing with the constant hum of insects. As I parked my RV at a remote campsite, a park ranger named Mitchell appeared, his orange vest bright against the darkening trees. "You sure you want to stay out here alone?" he asked, his tone friendly but cautious. "Why not?" I replied, trying to sound confident. He shrugged. "It's quiet, that's for sure, but stick to the marked trails. People get lost out here, and some say the swamp doesn't like strangers." I laughed nervously, brushing off his warning. He tipped his hat and left, leaving me alone with the encroaching shadows. As I set up my small campfire, I noticed an older woman standing near the forest entrance. She was watching me intently, her gray hair pulled back in a tight braid. I waved, but she didn't return the gesture. Instead, she called out, her voice carrying an odd weight. "The swamp doesn't forgive the curious," she said, her tone more ominous than I liked. Before I could respond, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the trees. I told myself she was just a local trying to spook me, but her words lingered as the night deepened. That night, the forest was eerily silent. I'd expected the usual symphony of crickets and frogs, but instead there was a suffocating stillness. As I sat by the fire, I heard faint whispers, too quiet to make out, but unmistakably human. I froze, straining my ears. The whispers grew louder, circling the RV, though I couldn't see anything beyond the firelight. Finally, I called out, "Hello? Is someone there?" The whispers stopped abruptly, leaving only the crackle of the fire. My heart raced as I climbed into the RV, locking the door behind me. I told myself it was just my imagination, the result of a long drive and an overactive mind. But when I woke the next morning, muddy handprints covered the windows. Large, smeared prints that didn't look entirely human. The next day, I decided to hike deeper into the forest, hoping to shake the uneasy feeling that had settled over me. The trails were muddy from an overnight storm, and the dense canopy made it hard to tell what time of day it was. The deeper I went, the more oppressive the forest felt. The air grew heavy, and the shadows seemed to shift and writhe, as though the trees themselves were alive. About an hour in, I found strange wooden symbols hanging from the branches. They looked hand-carved, crude but deliberate, circles, crosses, and spirals strung up with twine. I snapped a few photos for my blog, but a shiver ran down my spine. It felt wrong, like I was trespassing somewhere I didn't belong. As I turned to head back, I heard laughter, high-pitched and echoing unnaturally. My stomach clenched. I called out, hoping it was other campers, but no one answered. The laughter faded, replaced by the rustling of leaves as if something was following me. I quickened my pace, refusing to look back. That night, the unease turned to outright terror. As I sat in the RV trying to write about the day's hike, the lights began to flicker. Then the entire vehicle shook violently, as if something massive had slammed into it. I grabbed a flashlight and flung the door open, but there was nothing there. Only the dark, silent forest. As I stepped outside, the air grew colder. I swung the flashlight in every direction, the beam slicing through the darkness. That's when I saw it. A shadowy figure stood just beyond the edge of the firelight, tall and gaunt with glowing eyes that burned like embers. Its limbs were too long, its body unnaturally thin, and its head tilted as if studying me. "Who are you?" I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. The figure didn't move. It didn't speak. It simply stood there, watching. Then it began to drift toward me, its movements jerky and unnatural. I stumbled back into the RV, slamming the door shut and locking it. The figure didn't follow, but I could feel its presence lingering just outside. By morning, I was desperate to leave. I packed up quickly, but the RV wouldn't start. The engine sputtered and died, and the dashboard lights flickered uselessly. Frustrated, I grabbed my map and decided to hike to the ranger station for help. The forest seemed even more menacing in the daylight. The wooden symbols I had seen the day before were now broken, their pieces scattered across the trail. As I pushed deeper into the swamp, the air grew thicker, choking me with the stench of decay. The whispers returned, louder now, surrounding me on all sides. Eventually, I stumbled upon a clearing where a crude grave marker stood. A wooden cross, weathered and rotting, with a rusted knife embedded in the ground beside it. The whispers grew deafening, swirling around me in an unintelligible chorus. That's when I saw it again. The figure emerged from the shadows, more solid this time. Its face was pale and skeletal, its eyes burning with malevolent light. It raised one spindly arm, pointing directly at me. "I'm sorry," I gasped, though I didn't know what I was apologizing for. The figure tilted its head as if considering my words, before letting out a low, guttural growl that shook the ground beneath me. Panicked, I grabbed the knife from the grave and held it out like a talisman. The figure recoiled slightly but didn't retreat. In a desperate bid to escape, I dropped the knife and lit a small fire with the matches I kept in my pack. I hurled burning branches toward the figure, and for the first time it retreated, its form dissolving into the shadows. I didn't wait to see if it would return. I ran. By the time I made it back to the RV, the sun was beginning to rise. The engine miraculously started on the first try, and I tore out of the forest, not stopping until I reached a crowded rest area miles away. I haven't been back to Tate's Hell, and I don't plan to. I didn't write about the experience in my blog. Some things are too personal or too terrifying to share, but even now, I can't escape the feeling that I didn't leave the forest entirely behind. Last week, I found muddy handprints on my apartment window. I live on the 3rd floor. My name is Luke Phillips, and I'm 30 years old. This happened in October of last year, and even now I can barely bring myself to think about it. I don't know why I suggested Devil's Backbone for that camping trip. Maybe it was the thrill of the unknown, maybe just the lure of a good story. Whatever the reason, it's a decision I'll regret for the rest of my life. It started as an innocent idea. I was scrolling through articles about haunted places in Texas and stumbled upon Devil's Backbone, a winding ridge in the hill country, infamous for ghost sightings and eerie legends. I thought it'd make the perfect backdrop for a weekend camping trip. As a photographer, I couldn't resist the idea of capturing the misty trails and shadowy landscapes. Jason, my boyfriend of 5 years, wasn't thrilled but agreed. "This is just another one of your spooky obsessions," he teased as we loaded the RV. At 32, Jason prided himself on being the skeptic, the grounded one. He was coming along to humor me, or so he claimed. Lisa, my best friend since college, was the opposite. At 28, she had a deeply spiritual side and was fascinated by the paranormal. "I can feel places," she always said. She brought along her new boyfriend, Evan. I didn't know much about him except that he was quiet, outdoorsy, and seemed to have a dark edge, like he'd seen things he didn't talk about. We set out early on a Friday morning, the RV loaded with supplies, cameras, and hiking gear. The drive through the hill country was gorgeous. Rolling hills, golden grass, and patches of dense forest. As we wound our way up the backbone, I felt a strange mix of excitement and unease. The ridge had a way of playing tricks on your eyes. Shadows shifted in the trees, and the horizon seemed to ripple with heat, even though it wasn't that warm. "This place is beautiful," Lisa said, leaning out of the window to take a picture, "but it feels heavy." Jason rolled his eyes. "It feels like any other ridge in Texas." Evan said nothing, just stared out the window with a furrowed brow. We arrived at the campsite in the late afternoon. The spot was secluded with a view of the ridge and the sprawling valley below. As we set up, Lisa wandered off to explore, and I busied myself with my camera. The golden hour was breathtaking, the light filtering through the trees like something out of a dream. "Come look at this," Lisa called from the edge of the clearing. Jason and I joined her, and she pointed to a cluster of rocks etched with strange symbols. They looked ancient, jagged, and deliberate. "Probably just graffiti," Jason said, brushing it off. But Evan frowned. "They're warnings," he muttered. When we pressed him, he clammed up, saying, "It's nothing, just folklore." That night, as we sat around the campfire, the atmosphere shifted. The usual chirping of insects and rustling of leaves seemed to fade, replaced by an unnatural stillness. Even Jason noticed it. "Too quiet," he said, poking at the fire. "Where's all the wildlife?" Lisa stared into the flames. "They know something's wrong." I laughed nervously, trying to shake the tension. "Come on, it's just a quiet night. Let's tell ghost stories." We stayed up late, swapping tales and drinking. It wasn't until everyone had gone to bed that I heard it. The faint sound of whispering just beyond the RV. At first, I thought it was Lisa or Evan, but when I peeked outside, there was no one there, just the darkness pressing against the clearing. I told myself it was the wind. The next morning, we decided to hike to one of the overlooks. Jason took the lead, map in hand, while Lisa and I trailed behind, snapping pictures. Evan walked silently at the back, his eyes darting to every shadow. The trail was tougher than we expected, steep and rocky. The air felt thicker the higher we climbed, as if the ridge was trying to push us back. About halfway up, Jason stopped. "Do you see that?" he asked, pointing ahead. I squinted and saw what he meant, a dark figure standing on the trail, motionless. At first, I thought it was another hiker, but something about it was off. The proportions seemed wrong, the limbs too long, the stance unnatural. "Probably just a tree or something," Jason said, but his voice wavered. As we got closer, the figure was gone. The trail ahead was empty. Lisa grabbed my arm. "I don't like this. We should go back." "We're almost at the top," Jason said, forging ahead. "It's fine." We reached the overlook just as the fog rolled in, thick and sudden. The valley below disappeared into a sea of white. I took out my camera, hoping to capture the eerie beauty, but my hands were shaking. The atmosphere was oppressive, like the ridge itself was watching us. As we descended, Jason veered off the trail, saying he saw something he wanted to check out. We waited for him, but when he didn't come back, panic set in. Lisa started calling his name, her voice echoing into the fog. When Jason finally reappeared, he was pale and disoriented. "I was only gone for a minute," he said, but according to my watch, he'd been missing for nearly an hour. That night, everything unraveled. The RV's generator failed, leaving us in darkness, and Jason's phone glitched, the screen flickering before dying completely. Lisa was pacing, muttering about the symbols and how they'd felt like a warning. Evan sat by the fire, staring into the flames, his face tense. "I need to tell you something," he said finally, his voice low, almost a whisper. "When I was a kid, my brother and I camped near here. He heard something calling his name in the woods and went to check it out. We found him the next morning, but he wasn't whole. We moved away after that." Lisa's eyes widened. "You think it's the same thing?" Evan nodded. "The locals say it's a skinwalker. It mimics voices, draws people in, and feeds on their fear." Jason scoffed. "Come on, Evan, you're seriously buying into this?" But then the whispers started again, louder this time, circling the RV. Lisa froze, her face pale. "That's my voice," she said. "It's calling my name." I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, my heart pounding. The beam cut through the darkness, but the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, more insistent. Then I saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the clearing. Its body twisted and wrong, its face featureless, but its eyes glowed faintly in the dark. I stumbled back inside, locking the door. "We're not safe here," I said, my voice shaking. "We need to leave." We decided to hike out at dawn, leaving the RV behind, but the ridge had other plans. As we made our way down the trail, the fog thickened and the whispers grew louder. At one point, Jason swore he saw Lisa up ahead, even though she was right next to me. He ran toward the figure, ignoring our shouts, and disappeared into the mist. When we found him, he was bleeding from shallow cuts across his chest, his clothes torn. He couldn't explain what had happened. Evan lit a makeshift torch, using it to keep the creature at bay as we pressed on. He whispered something under his breath, prayers maybe, or chants, and the whispers seemed to falter. When the trail finally opened up onto the road, I felt a wave of relief. But as I turned back, I saw it one last time, a shadowy figure standing on the ridge, watching us. We made it out alive, but none of us were the same. Jason stopped dismissing the supernatural, but he doesn't talk about what happened. Lisa refuses to camp anymore, and Evan moved back to the city, far from any wilderness. As for me, I deleted every photo I took that weekend, afraid they might carry some trace of the thing that stalked us. If you ever visit Devil's Backbone, don't ignore the whispers, and if something calls your name, don't answer. My name is Jackson Stevens, and I'm 36 years old. This happened in late October just last year. I was camping in Wendell State Forest with my best friend Tom, and I can't stop thinking about it, replaying every detail in my mind. I used to be someone who loved exploring, who believed the world held mysteries that were mostly beautiful. Now I'm not so sure. It started as my idea, a weekend camping trip in one of Massachusetts' most remote forests. I'd been obsessed with the eerie reputation of Wendell State Forest after reading a blog about strange sightings and ghost stories tied to the area. For a photographer like me, it sounded perfect. Rustic trails, abandoned cabins, and mist-covered lakes to capture. Plus, I thought it would be a good way to unplug away from the constant buzz of my job in Boston. Tom didn't feel the same way. He'd made it clear during the 2-hour drive in my ancient RV that he was only coming to keep me out of trouble. "You have a bad habit of picking creepy places to camp," he muttered, staring out the window at the thickening woods. "I'm not dragging you into some horror movie," I replied with a laugh. "It's just a forest." He raised an eyebrow at me. "Just a forest? You literally said this place is known for weird disappearances." "They're just stories," I said. Tom sighed but didn't push further. That was Tom for you. Skeptical, steady, and loyal to a fault. Even if he thought I was nuts, he'd still have my back. We reached the trailhead late that afternoon. The parking lot was empty except for my RV. That should have felt peaceful, but something about the silence unsettled me. It wasn't the kind of quiet you get in nature, full of birdsong and rustling leaves. This was heavy, like the woods were holding their breath. Tom unloaded our gear while I grabbed my camera. The first red flag came early. The tent poles I'd brought snapped while we were setting up camp. They weren't bent or cracked. They just broke apart in my hands like dried twigs. "You're kidding me," Tom groaned. "Did you buy this at a dollar store?" "It's fine," I said, trying to sound confident. "We'll improvise." We managed to rig the tent with some branches and duct tape, but it leaned at an awkward angle, like as if the forest itself didn't want us there. I busied myself taking photos of the area. Towering oaks, golden leaves carpeting the ground, and a peculiar clearing about 100 yards from our campsite. It was perfectly round, with no vegetation in its center, and blackened tree trunks encircling it. I snapped a photo, shivering despite myself. That first night, the forest came alive with strange noises. Around midnight, I woke to the sound of footsteps circling our tent. I froze, straining to listen. "Tom," I whispered. "Do you hear that?" "Probably just deer," he murmured, half asleep. The footsteps grew louder, deliberate. They weren't the light, random movements of an animal. They were purposeful, like someone pacing. Then, just as suddenly as they started, they stopped. Tom heard it too now. He sat up, grabbing his flashlight. "Stay here," he said. "Are you crazy?" I hissed, but he was already unzipping the tent. He swept the light around the campsite, revealing only empty woods. Still, neither of us could shake the feeling that we were being watched. The next day, we hiked deeper into the forest, following a faint trail that seemed to lead toward the clearing I'd photographed. Along the way, we discovered something strange. Massive footprints in the dirt, far larger than any humans. They looked almost like bare feet, but were elongated, with claw-like impressions at the toes. "Maybe someone's messing with us," Tom said, though he didn't sound convinced. Miles from civilization? Highly unlikely. We kept walking, the trail narrowing and twisting in ways that made no sense. At one point, it felt like we were walking in circles, though we hadn't turned back. Then we found it. The clearing. In the daylight, it was even more unsettling. The scorched trees looked as though they'd been burned from the inside out, and at the center of the circle lay a pile of animal bones, picked clean. Tom grabbed my arm. "Jackson, let's go. Now." I hesitated, wanting to photograph it, but the unease in his voice convinced me. As we turned to leave, I heard a faint sound like a whisper carried on the wind. It was my name. "Jackson," the voice said. I spun around, but no one was there. That night, the real horror began. We sat by the fire, trying to shake off the day's weirdness, when Tom stood up abruptly, staring into the trees. "What is it?" I asked. "There's someone out there," he said, his voice low. I followed his gaze, but saw nothing. Probably a raccoon, or... Before I could finish, I noticed something moving between the trees. A figure, just barely visible in the firelight. At first, I thought it was a person, but something about its movements was wrong. It didn't walk, it glided, its limbs too long, its head tilted at an unnatural angle. "Tom," I whispered, my heart pounding. "That's not a person." He grabbed a branch from the fire, holding it like a weapon. The figure stopped at the edge of the light, its hollow eyes reflecting the flames. Then, it turned and disappeared into the darkness. We didn't sleep. Every noise, every rustle of leaves made us jump. Around 3 a.m., I heard Tom's voice outside the tent. "Jackson, come here," it said. I froze. Tom was sitting next to me, wide awake. "You heard that right?" I whispered. He nodded, his face pale. "Don't move." The voice called again, more insistent. "Jackson, help me." I covered my ears, willing it to stop. It didn't. At dawn, we decided to leave. We packed up in silence, the fear between us palpable. As we hiked back toward the RV, the forest seemed to change. The trail we'd followed was gone, replaced by dense underbrush. The trees leaned closer, their branches twisting like grasping fingers. Then we saw them. Figures emerged from the shadows, identical to us. A second Tom, a second Jackson. Their faces were blank, their eyes dark. They moved in jerky, unnatural ways, like puppets on invisible strings. The second Tom spoke first. "Stay," it said in a hollow, echoing voice. "We want you to stay." The second Jackson smiled, baring too many teeth. "You belong here now." Tom grabbed my hand and whispered, "Run." We sprinted through the forest, the figures following close behind. They didn't run, they floated, gliding effortlessly over the uneven ground. When we finally reached the RV, I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking. The figures stopped at the tree line, watching us with their hollow eyes as we sped away. I don't know what they were. Skinwalkers, spirits, demons, maybe something else entirely. All I know is that we weren't supposed to be there, and they made that clear. Tom and I haven't spoken much since that trip. He says he wants to forget, but I can't. Sometimes I wake up to the sound of footsteps outside my apartment. Sometimes I think I see a second me watching from the shadows. I don't take photos anymore. My name is Gabriel Jacobs, and I'm 39 years old. This happened about 6 months ago, though it feels like yesterday. I was at a breaking point in my life, still reeling from the loss of my wife, Rebecca. She'd been gone for a year, but the grief clung to me like a shadow I couldn't shake. I thought a solo camping trip to Davy Crockett National Forest might help. The peace and solitude would let me clear my head, or so I thought. The forest was stunning. Towering pines stretched endlessly toward the sky, their branches forming a canopy that filtered the sunlight into soft, golden beams. I pulled my RV into a remote campsite, far from the busier areas. Solitude was what I needed. I didn't want kids on bikes zipping past or couples chatting around their campfires. Just me, the trees, and the open air. After setting up camp, I decided to take a short walk and familiarize myself with the area. The forest was alive with sound, the rustle of leaves, the chirping of birds, and the occasional creak of a swaying tree. It was peaceful, exactly what I'd hoped for. But as I ventured deeper, a strange unease settled over me. The air felt heavier, the shadows darker. I shrugged it off and headed back to the RV before nightfall. Later that evening, as I sat by my campfire, I heard a voice behind me. "Beautiful night, isn't it?" Startled, I turned to see an older man standing just outside the firelight. He looked to be in his 70s, with a wiry frame and a face weathered by years of outdoor living. "Didn't mean to scare you," he said, stepping closer. "Name's Clean. I live near the forest's edge." "Gabriel," I replied, shaking his hand. We chatted for a bit, mostly small talk about the forest and camping. Then out of nowhere, he said, "You hear the whispers yet?" I frowned. Whispers? He nodded, his expression serious. The pines, they talk to some folks. Most don't listen, but those who do, well, they don't always make it back. I chuckled nervously, unsure if he was joking or just trying to spook me. I'll keep that in mind. Do more than that, he said. If you hear something calling your name, don't follow it. And whatever you do, don't stay out after dark. With that, he tipped his hat and disappeared into the trees, leaving me alone with a fire that suddenly felt far too small. That night, I lay awake in the RV, Clean's words replaying in my mind. The forest outside was silent except for the occasional rustle of leaves. And then, just as I was drifting off, I heard it. A faint whisper, barely audible over the hum of the night. Gabriel. I bolted upright, my heart hammering in my chest. It was probably the wind, I told myself. Just the wind. But the voice came again, softer this time, as if it were right outside the RV. Gabriel. I grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, scanning the darkness. The forest was still, the trees casting long, eerie shadows in the moonlight. I saw nothing, but the whispering continued, circling me, always just out of reach. Forcing myself to breathe, I retreated to the RV and locked the door. It was a long time before I fell asleep. The next day, I decided to explore deeper into the forest, hoping to shake the uneasy feeling from the night before. The sunlight filtering through the pines was reassuring, and I soon found myself lost in the beauty of the trails. About an hour in, I came across a narrow, overgrown path I hadn't seen on the map. It was marked by strange symbols carved into the bark of the trees, circles, lines, and jagged shapes that didn't look random. Against my better judgment, I followed the trail. The further I went, the quieter the forest became. No bird song, no rustling leaves, just an oppressive silence that pressed down on me like a weight. Then I heard the whispers again. Gabriel, help me. I froze. It was Rebecca's voice, clear and unmistakable. My throat tightened and I spun around searching for the source. Nothing, just the endless trees. Gabriel. The voice was closer now, pleading, please. I stumbled forward, desperate to find her, even though I knew it couldn't be real. Rebecca was gone. I'd seen her buried, and yet her voice was here, drawing me deeper into the forest. I don't know how long I wandered before I found the cabin. It was old, its wooden walls warped and rotting, half hidden among the trees. I approached cautiously, the whispers swirling around me like a sinister wind. Inside, the air was stifling. The walls were covered in carvings similar to the symbols I'd seen on the trees, but these were more intricate, almost ritualistic. In the corner, I found a tattered journal. The pages were filled with frantic scrawls describing voices, shadows, and people who'd vanished without a trace. They lure you in, one entry read. They make you see what you want to see, hear what you want to hear. Don't follow them. Don't listen. A creak behind me sent a jolt of terror through my body. I spun around, but the doorway was empty. The whispers, however, were louder now, more insistent. Gabriel, come back to me. Rebecca's voice. I ran from the cabin, my heart pounding. The forest seemed alive, the trees closing in around me, the whispers echoing from every direction. I couldn't tell where I was going, only that I had to get away. As night fell, the whispers turned to laughter, soft, mocking, and inhuman. I stumbled into a clearing, my legs trembling, and saw a figure standing at the edge of the trees. It was Rebecca, or something that looked like her. She smiled, her eyes glinting in the moonlight. You found me, she said, her voice warm and familiar. Come closer. I took a step forward, tears streaming down my face, but something in the back of my mind screamed at me to stop. This wasn't Rebecca. It couldn't be. Who are you? I demanded, my voice shaking. The smile twisted into something monstrous. Don't you recognize me, Gabriel? I've been waiting for you. The figure dissolved into shadow, its form shifting and stretching until it became something unrecognizable. A towering mass of darkness with glowing eyes, surrounded by the sound of countless voices whispering in unison. I scrambled back, fumbling with the lighter in my pocket. My hand brushed against a bundle of dried sage I'd picked up earlier in town. Clean had said something about its protective properties, though I hadn't believed him at the time. With shaking hands, I lit the sage and held it out in front of me. The entity recoiled, the whispers turning into a deafening roar. The flames seemed to weaken it, the shadows retreating as I waved the burning sage. Leave me alone, I shouted, my voice echoing through the clearing. The entity let out a final guttural howl before vanishing into the darkness. The forest fell silent. At dawn, I found my way back to the RV, guided by some unseen force. Clean was waiting at the edge of the campsite, his expression grim but unsurprised. "You made it," he said simply. I nodded, too exhausted to speak. "Not everyone does," he added. "The forest let you go. Don't push your luck." I left Davy Crockett National Forest that morning, the towering pines shrinking in the rearview mirror. I haven't been camping since, and I doubt I ever will. Some places aren't meant to be understood, only respected. And if you ever find yourself in the whispering pines, don't listen to the voices. Whatever you hear, it isn't real. At least I hope it isn't. My name is Jaden Mason, and I was 40 years old when this happened in the summer of 2022. After retiring from the military, I spent most of my days traveling the country in my RV, searching for something I couldn't quite name. Peace, maybe, or just a sense of purpose. I'd spent decades in combat zones, surrounded by noise and chaos, and I thought the wilderness might silence the ghosts in my head. That's what brought me to the Laurel Fork Wilderness in West Virginia. I'd heard about the area from a fellow camper, a secluded stretch of forest, untouched and serene, perfect for someone like me who preferred solitude. I didn't know then about the stories surrounding Devil's Hollow or the witch that locals claimed had cursed the land. If I had, I might have gone somewhere else, or maybe not. The first day was uneventful. The road to my chosen campsite was narrow and bumpy, the kind of terrain that tested your patience in your vehicle. My RV wasn't new, but it had served me well over the years. Still, it groaned and sputtered as I navigated the steep incline toward the hollow. About a mile from my intended spot, the engine stalled. I cursed under my breath, turning the key repeatedly, but all I got was the tired whine of a machine that had had enough. I grabbed my tools, hoping it was something simple, but as the hours dragged on, it became clear that I wasn't going anywhere anytime soon. "Well," I muttered, wiping grease from my hands, "guess this is home for now." I set up camp just off the road, close enough to the hollow to feel its presence, but far enough to keep my distance. The air was cooler here, the shadows deeper. I told myself it was just the terrain, the dense canopy blocking out the sun. But there was something else too, a heaviness I couldn't explain. The first night, I slept poorly. The forest was too quiet, the kind of silence that amplifies every creak and rustle. I'd spent enough time in the wild to know the sounds of nocturnal animals, but this was different. There were no owls, no crickets, nothing but the occasional groan of the wind through the trees. At some point, I thought I heard something outside the RV, a faint scratching, like claws against metal. I froze, listening, but it stopped as quickly as it had started. When I finally worked up the nerve to look, flashlight in hand, there was nothing there, just the endless expanse of trees. I told myself it was the wind and went back to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. The next morning, I found the dead birds. They were arranged in a perfect circle about 10 feet from my RV, their feathers ruffled but otherwise untouched. There were no signs of an attack. No blood, just 7 small bodies, their lifeless eyes staring up at the canopy. My stomach churned as I stood over them, trying to make sense of it. Predators don't do this. Even kids pulling pranks wouldn't bother hiking this far out. I buried them, more out of respect than anything else, and spent the rest of the day exploring the area. The forest was dense, the trails barely more than animal paths winding through the underbrush. About a mile in, I found the first symbol. It was carved into the bark of a tree, a jagged spiral surrounded by smaller runes I didn't recognize. The cuts were fresh, the edges of the bark still raw. My first thought was kids again, but the precision of the carvings made me second guess. This wasn't random graffiti. It meant something, though I didn't know what. That night, the storm rolled in. The wind howled through the hollow, rain hammering against the roof of the RV. I huddled inside, reading by flashlight, the sound of the storm oddly comforting. It drowned out the silence, the oppressive weight of the forest. But then the whispers started. At first, I thought it was the wind, the way it curled around the trees, carrying the echoes of distant sounds. But as I listened, the whispers grew more distinct, more deliberate. They weren't words exactly, but they carried intent. a low, murmuring chant that made my skin crawl. I tried to ignore it, burying my head in my book, but the sound burrowed into my mind. It felt like it was coming from inside the RV, pressing against my skull. And then I saw her. She stood just outside the window, barely visible through the rain-streaked glass, a cloaked figure, her face hidden in the shadows of her hood. She didn't move, didn't make a sound, but her presence was suffocating. I grabbed my flashlight and swung open the door, but by the time I stepped outside, she was gone. The next day, I found the grave marker. It was tucked deep within the hollow, a small stone slab, half buried in moss and dirt. The name was barely legible, worn down by centuries of weather. Margaret Ellis. Beside it, I found a leather diary, its pages brittle and stained. I flipped through it carefully, piecing together fragments of Margaret's story. She wasn't a witch, not in the way the legends claimed. She'd been a healer, accused by her neighbors when a plague swept through the settlement. They blamed her for the deaths, dragging her into the hollow and burning her at the stake. Her final entry was a curse, scrawled in trembling handwriting. To those who condemned me, I curse this hollow with my dying breath. May your bloodline suffer as I have suffered, and may no soul find peace in this cursed place. That night was the worst. The storm returned, fiercer than before, and the whispers gave way to screams. They were everywhere, echoing off the walls of the RV, filling every corner with their anguish. The cloaked figure appeared again, closer this time. She stood in the middle of the clearing, her hood pulled back to reveal a face that was both beautiful and grotesque, her eyes burning like embers. "Why did you come here?" she asked, her voice a low growl that vibrated in my chest. My throat tightened, the words catching like barbed wire. "I didn't know." Her expression twisted into a sneer. "They never know." She raised a hand, and the world tilted. I fell to my knees, my vision blurring as memories flooded my mind, moments I'd tried so hard to forget. The sounds of gunfire, the screams of my comrades, the smell of blood and burning sand. "Stop!" I shouted, clutching my head. "Please, stop!" The screams faded, replaced by her laughter. "You carry death with you, soldier," she said. "Why should I spare you?" Desperate, I fumbled for my dog tags, ripping them from my neck. "I'm sorry," I choked out, holding them up. "For whatever they did to you, I'm sorry." Her laughter stopped. She stared at the tags, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she lowered her hand. The storm ceased. The whispers faded, and she was gone. The next morning, I left the hollow. My RV started without a hitch, as if the past few days had been nothing more than a bad dream. But as I drove down the winding road, I couldn't shake the feeling that Margaret Ellis was watching me, her presence lingering in the shadows. I don't know if I appeased her or if she simply let me go. But I do know one thing. There are places in this world that remember the horrors done to them, places that hold grudges. And Devil's Hollow is one of them. My name is Hazel Kennedy, and I was 30 when this happened. I don't tell this story often, partly because most people wouldn't believe me, and partly because I still can't explain everything that occurred during those 3 nights at Mohawk Trail State Forest in Massachusetts. I went there alone with good intentions, a weekend in nature to reset my mind and find inspiration for my writing. What I found instead was something I'll never forget and wish I could. I arrived on a Friday afternoon in late October, the kind of day where the air bites just enough to remind you winter is coming. My RV was small but comfortable, perfect for solo trips. I parked at a secluded campsite near a trailhead. The forest was dense, the kind of place where sunlight filters through in narrow beams and shadows linger long after sunset. The first signs of trouble came early, but I brushed them off. My tent, a new purchase, had a faulty zipper that wouldn't stay closed. My camp stove refused to light, forcing me to eat a cold sandwich instead of the hot meal I'd planned. I figured these were minor inconveniences. I was here to escape the city and prove to myself I could handle life in the wilderness. The setbacks felt like part of the challenge. I met a man at the trailhead as I was unloading my gear. He introduced himself as Paul Riley, a friendly older guy in his 50s with a grizzled beard and an easy smile. His RV was parked a few sites away, and he told me he was a regular here. "First time at Mohawk Trail?" he asked. "Yeah," I said, smiling despite my nerves. "It's beautiful." "It is," he said, his tone shifting slightly. "But be careful. These woods, well, they've got stories. Respect the woods and they'll respect you back." I laughed awkwardly, unsure how to respond. Paul must have seen the confusion on my face because he added, "Just watch for strange things, all right? Animals acting weird, sounds you can't place. If something feels off, trust your gut." I thanked him, but his words stayed with me as I hiked back to my site. I glanced over my shoulder more than once, half expecting to see someone or something following me. The first night was uneventful, though I struggled to sleep. The forest was alive with sound, the rustling of leaves, the occasional hoot of an owl, and the faint trickle of a brook nearby. Around midnight, I heard a noise that stood out, a low guttural roll, a sound like a cross between a growl and a groan. I froze in my sleeping bag, straining to hear it again, but the forest fell silent. The next morning, I chalked it up to nerves. After all, I wasn't used to being alone in such an isolated place. Determined to shake off the unease, I spent the day exploring the trail and taking notes for my essay. I even spotted a deer grazing near the brook. It was standing perfectly still, its dark eyes fixed on me. Something about its posture felt wrong. I moved closer to take a picture, but as soon as I raised my phone, it bolted. Its movements were stiff and awkward, like it wasn't used to running. I brushed it off. Wild animals behave strangely sometimes, right? The second night was when things truly began to unravel. It started with small, unsettling details. My flashlight, which I was certain I'd left on the picnic table, was missing. My food supplies looked disturbed, though I'd locked them in a bear-safe container. I found my sleeping bag partially pulled out of the RV, as if someone or something had tried to drag it away. Then came the sounds. At first, it was just footsteps, soft and measured, circling my RV. I peeked through the window, expecting to see a raccoon or maybe that deer from earlier. Instead, I saw nothing. The footsteps stopped when I looked out, but resumed the moment I turned away. Around midnight, I heard my name. "Lily?" It was faint, almost a whisper, but unmistakable. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. "Lily," the voice repeated, clearer this time and coming from the woods. I grabbed a flashlight and shone it toward the sound, but the beam only illuminated trees and shadows. My hands trembled as I locked the RV door, my heart pounding. There was no one out there. There couldn't be. The voice came again, closer now. "Lily, help me." I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat curled in the corner of the RV, clutching a can of bear spray and my phone, though I had no signal. I thought about Paul and his warning. Could this be one of those strange things he mentioned? Was it a prank? A hallucination brought on by stress? At dawn, I stepped outside, determined to leave. That's when I saw the tracks, large, human-like footprints in the soft earth around my RV. They were too big to be mine, and too far apart to belong to someone walking normally. My stomach twisted as I followed them a short distance into the woods. They ended abruptly, as if whatever made them had vanished into thin air. I packed up my things as quickly as possible, but before I could start the engine, I heard something that made my blood run cold. Footsteps approaching, heavy and deliberate. I looked up and saw Paul, or at least something that looked like him, standing at the edge of the clearing. "Paul?" I called out, my voice shaky. He didn't respond. His posture was rigid, his head tilted at an unnatural angle. Then, slowly, he smiled, a wide, toothy grin that didn't reach his eyes. "You should have listened," he said, his voice distorted like a recording played too slow. My instincts screamed at me to run, but my legs felt rooted in place as I watched in horror. Paul's body began to shift, his arms elongated, his face contorted, and his skin seemed to ripple as fur sprouted along his limbs. Within moments, he was no longer human. Instead, he resembled the deer I'd seen earlier, but grotesquely wrong. Its legs bent backward, its face a nightmarish blend of human and animal features. I don't remember starting the RV or how I managed to drive away, but I do remember the sound of something heavy slamming against the back of the vehicle as I sped down the dirt road. The creature chased me for what felt like miles, its distorted form visible in my rearview mirror. It moved with terrifying speed, its limbs twisting unnaturally as it closed the distance. Finally, I reached the highway. The creature stopped at the edge of the forest, watching as I drove away. Its eyes, black and unblinking, burned into my memory. I never went back to Mohawk Trail. I later learned that the area is steeped in Native American folklore, including stories of shape-shifting spirits that mimic human voices to lure their victims. I don't know if what I encountered was the skinwalker or something else entirely, but I do know this. The woods don't belong to us. They never did, and some places are better left alone. My name is Thomas Evans, and I'm 40 years old. This happened last December when I decided to take my RV into Guadalupe Mountains National Park in Texas. I needed a break from everything: work, people, life itself. After years as a war correspondent, I thought I could handle anything. What I found in those mountains made me question everything I believed. The park was as beautiful as I'd hoped. Jagged limestone peaks loomed over the dry, barren landscape, and the December air was crisp, almost cleansing. I parked my RV in a remote spot near McKittrick Canyon, away from the more crowded areas. Isolation was exactly what I wanted: silence, space, and time to think. I spent the first day hiking the trails, taking in the views, and snapping photos for a potential article I'd pitch later. The emptiness was striking. I barely saw anyone else on the trails, and the few people I did meet kept to themselves. It was perfect, or so I thought. On my way back to the RV, I stopped at a small gift shop near the park entrance. The woman behind the counter, Maria, greeted me warmly and struck up a conversation. She was one of those chatty locals who could make you feel at home with just a few words. "You camping here alone?" she asked as she rang up my purchase. "Yeah," I said, looking for some peace and quiet. Her smile faltered. "You're brave, I'll give you that." "What do you mean?" I asked. She glanced at the window as if checking for something. "You ever hear about the Devil's Grin?" I shook my head, curious but skeptical. "Let me guess, a ghost story?" Her expression darkened. "Not exactly. It's an old legend around these parts. Folks say there's something in these mountains, something that feeds on people's fears. You see a tall figure with a grin too wide for its face, leave right then and there." I laughed it off, thanked her, and left. Legends were just that, stories. But as I drove back to my campsite, her words stuck with me like a splinter I couldn't quite remove. That night, the wind howled through the mountains, rattling the RV. I sat by the small campfire I'd built, sipping coffee and staring at the stars. The silence was almost oppressive, broken only by the occasional rustle of dry brush. I was about to head inside when I noticed movement near the edge of the firelight. A shadow, too tall, too thin. It flitted between the trees. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. "Hello," I called, shining my flashlight toward the trees. Nothing, just the wind and the flickering flames. I told myself it was nothing, just my mind playing tricks after Maria's story. But as I climbed into the RV and locked the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. The next day, I hiked deeper into McKittrick Canyon, hoping to shake off the unease from the night before. The sun was bright, and the landscape was stunning. Sheer cliffs, rocky trails, and the occasional cluster of juniper trees. But the sense of isolation was overwhelming. My watch stopped working halfway through the hike, and I realized I'd lost track of time. By the time I made it back to the RV, the sun was already setting, and a strange fog was creeping over the mountains. As I opened the door, I noticed something odd. My hiking boots, which I'd left neatly by the RV steps, were gone. In their place was a single, weathered boot I didn't recognize. That night, the wind returned with a vengeance, slamming against the RV. The heater sputtered and died, leaving me shivering under a pile of blankets. I tried to distract myself by writing, but my thoughts kept drifting back to Maria's warning. Then came the knock. It was faint at first, like someone tapping on the RV's metal siding. I held my breath, waiting for it to stop, but it only grew louder, more insistent. I grabbed a flashlight and peered out the window. Nothing, just darkness. "No, you couldn't handle it," a voice sneered, low and mocking. It was my voice, but twisted, distorted. I spun around, the flashlight trembling in my hand. "Who's there?" The knocking stopped for a moment. The RV was silent. Then I saw it. A figure stood just beyond the firelight, as tall and impossibly thin. Its limbs too long and its head tilted at an unnatural angle. Its grin stretched across its entire face, impossibly wide, as if someone had carved it into its skin. Its glowing eyes locked onto mine, and I felt a wave of cold terror wash over me. I blinked, and it was gone. The next morning, I found scratches on the RV door, deep and jagged. I tried to tell myself it was an animal, but deep down, I knew better. I decided to leave, but when I tried to start the RV, the engine sputtered and died. The battery was drained despite being fully charged the day before. My phone was dead too, though I had charged it overnight. Panic set in. I packed a bag and started hiking toward the nearest trailhead, but no matter which path I took, I kept ending up back at the RV. It was as if the mountains themselves were conspiring to trap me. As night fell, the whispers started. They were faint at first, just a low murmur on the wind, but soon they grew louder, forming words, my words. They repeated things I'd written in my articles, things I'd never said aloud. Then they changed, mocking me, twisting my thoughts against me. "You couldn't save them," one voice said, echoing the guilt I'd carried since my time as a correspondent. "You're a coward," another sneered. "Running away won't fix anything." I covered my ears, but the voices only grew louder, more insistent, desperate, and broken. I returned to the campfire, hoping the flames would keep whatever it was at bay. The grinning figure emerged from the shadows, its movements jerky and unnatural. "Why are you doing this?" I shouted, my voice cracking. The figure tilted its head, its grin widening. "You did this to yourself," it said, its voice a distorted mix of my own and others I didn't recognize. It stepped closer, and the fire seemed to dim, the air growing colder. I could feel my mind unraveling, my grip on reality slipping. The entity showed me visions of the people I couldn't save, their faces twisted in anguish. It fed on my guilt, my fear, my despair. Then I remembered Maria's words, "Leave right then and there." I grabbed my notebook, the source of my pride, my ambition, and threw it into the fire. The flames roared to life, and the figure let out a guttural shriek, retreating into the shadows. The whispers faded, replaced by an eerie silence. When dawn broke, the RV started as if nothing had happened. I didn't question it. I drove out of the canyon without looking back. I wrote about the trip, but I left out the supernatural details, chalking it up to altitude sickness and overwork. Still, the memory lingers, and every now and then, I catch a glimpse of that grin in my dreams. Some legends aren't meant to be tested. My name is Jacob Foreman, and I'm 33 years old. Last spring, I decided to take a solo RV trip through Texas to clear my head. This happened in Devil's Sinkhole State Natural Area, a remote place I chose because it sounded like the perfect spot for solitude and inspiration. I never believed in ghost stories or superstitions, but that trip changed everything. It started out like any other camping adventure. I arrived at the park late in the afternoon and set up my RV at the closest designated camping area near the famous sinkhole. The Devil's Sinkhole is a massive limestone cavern that drops over 300 feet into the earth. It's known for its bat colonies, and every evening, thousands of bats emerge in a swirling mass, a sight I hope to capture for my blog. The place was eerily quiet, but I didn't mind. Solitude was the whole point of the trip. As I parked my RV, I noticed another vehicle pulling up, a green park ranger's truck. A woman stepped out, mid-40s, with a weathered face that looked like it had seen more than its share of sun and wind. "You're here alone?" she asked, her tone more curious than accusatory. I nodded. "Yeah, just me. I'm documenting the park for my blog." She gave me a look, not unkind but cautious. "Don't stay out too late," she said. "This place has its stories." I smiled, assuming she meant coyotes or other wildlife. "I'll be careful." Her eyes lingered on me for a moment before she added, "Be sure to leave before sundown tomorrow. The Devil's Caravan comes through here at night." I laughed, thinking she was joking, but her expression didn't change. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Just don't stay past sundown," she said, then climbed back into her truck and drove off, leaving me with a strange feeling in the pit of my stomach. The first signs of trouble came that evening. I'd planned to use the RV's generator to charge my camera and other equipment, but about an hour before sunset, the generator sputtered and died. I tried restarting it several times, but nothing worked. My backup battery pack wouldn't turn on either, and my phone signal had vanished entirely. I decided to make the best of it. I grabbed my flashlight and headed out to the sinkhole to watch the bats. It was an incredible sight, thousands of them spiraling into the sky like a living tornado. But as I stood there, taking it all in, I thought I heard something else. A faint whisper at first, I told myself it was just the wind echoing through the canyon, but the sound grew louder. It wasn't words exactly, just a low rhythmic murmur, like chanting. I shined my flashlight toward the sinkhole, but there was nothing there. The bats had all flown off, leaving the area in an oppressive silence. That was when I saw the shadows. They appeared on the ground near the edge of the sinkhole, tall and humanoid, but there was nothing nearby to cast them. My heart raced as I scanned the area with my flashlight. The shadows didn't move, but they didn't vanish either. I told myself it was just a trick of the light and hurried back to the RV. That night, the real horror began. It started with the sound of wheels. At first, it was faint, like an old wagon rolling over gravel. I sat up in bed, listening. The sound grew louder, accompanied by the soft clip-clop of hooves. I peeked out the RV window, expecting to see a group of late-night campers, but what I saw froze me in place. A caravan of wagons was moving through the fog, illuminated by an eerie bluish glow. The wagons looked ancient, their wooden wheels creaking under their weight. Shadowy figures rode skeletal horses, their faces obscured by darkness. I wanted to believe it was some kind of historical reenactment or hallucination brought on by exhaustion, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. The caravan moved silently, the figures turning their heads toward my RV as they passed. Then one of them stopped. A tall, shadowy rider dismounted from his spectral horse and began walking toward the RV. His movements were slow but deliberate, like he knew I was watching. I stumbled back from the window, my breath coming in short gasps. The figure stopped just outside the RV, his glowing red eyes piercing through the darkness. "Jacob," he said, his voice deep and resonant, "you've traveled far. Come with us." My blood turned to ice. I don't remember how long I sat there, paralyzed with fear. The figure didn't move, but his presence was suffocating, as if the air itself had thickened. Finally, I forced myself to speak. "Who are you? What do you want?" The figure tilted his head, almost amused. "I am the conductor of the caravan. We travel these lands seeking those who are lost. Join us and you will be free of your burdens." His words sent a chill down my spine. They weren't just words, they were images and emotions invading my mind. I saw flashes of myself wandering endlessly through deserts and forests, untethered from time. It was tempting in a strange, horrifying way, but something inside me pushed back. "No," I said, my voice trembling. "I'm not going anywhere with you." The conductor's eyes narrowed. "You resist, but you will join us. All travelers do, in time." He raised a hand and the RV shook violently. The lights flickered and a horrible scraping sound filled the air, like nails on metal. I grabbed my wallet instinctively, pulling out a small iron cross my grandmother had given me years ago. When I held it up, the conductor recoiled, his figure wavering like smoke in the wind. The caravan began to fade, the wagons dissolving into the fog. "You cannot escape us," the conductor said, his voice echoing as he disappeared. "We will return." The next morning, I left Devil's Sinkhole as quickly as possible. My RV started without issue, as if nothing had happened, but I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. When I got back to civilization, I tried to research the Devil's Caravan, but all I found were vague references to ghostly wagons and lost souls. No one seemed to know the full story, and part of me was relieved. I didn't include the experience in my blog. Who would believe me? But even now, months later, I sometimes wake up in the middle of the night, my heart racing, and when the room is quiet enough, I think I can still hear the creaking of wagon wheels. This is my story for whatever it's worth. If you're ever near Devil's Sinkhole, be careful, and whatever you do, don't stay past sundown. I thought it was just another quiet shift. But that night in Crooked Pine National Forest, I learned silence is where terror hides. My name is Walt Fraw, and this happened to me in October 1987 in the dense woods of rural Georgia. I've been a deputy sheriff for 13 years, working the kind of small-town beat where your biggest problem is a drunk farmer or a teenager with a lead foot. But Crooked Pine has always been different. Folks around here don't talk about it much, but everyone knows something's wrong with that forest. People vanish out there, not hunters getting lost or hikers going too far off the trail, but entire groups gone without a trace. Animals avoid it too. Deer won't graze, and even the birds stop singing when you get too close. It was late, about 9 p.m., when the call came in. Dispatch said a local hiker named Rory Claiborne had gone missing. His wife hadn't heard from him since morning, and his truck was still parked at the forest's edge. A standard missing person case, except it was crooked pine. I pulled into the lot, my headlights slicing through the mist that hung low to the ground. Rory's rusty Ford was there, empty, keys still in the ignition. I grabbed my flashlight, radio, and service pistol and set off into the trees. The first mile into the forest seemed normal. Quiet, sure, but forests at night are quiet. Then, gradually, the atmosphere shifted. The trees felt closer, their branches gnarled like skeletal fingers clawing at the moonless sky. The air was heavy, damp, and carried a faint sour smell, like something had died and never been found. "Rory?" I called, my voice swallowed by the darkness. The beam of my flashlight bounced off trunks and underbrush, revealing nothing but shadows. "Rory Claiborne, it's Deputy Fraw. Call out if you can hear me." Nothing. I kept moving, the unease settling deeper in my gut. Around midnight, I came to a clearing. At its center was a strange formation of stones arranged in a rough circle. They looked ancient, the kind of thing archaeologists would write books about, and there, slumped against one of the stones, was Rory. "Rory," I rushed to him, relieved, until I saw his face. His eyes, no, not eyes. His face. His mouth was open in a silent scream, his lips torn, his skin stretched taut like he'd been mummified. His hands clutched his chest and claw marks raked his shirt. Whatever killed him had done so in a frenzy. I stumbled back, bile rising in my throat. But before I could process what I was seeing, a sound froze me, a deep, resonant crack like a tree snapping under its own weight. It came from the woods behind me, followed by a heavy thud. My light darted across the tree line, but there was nothing there. "Who's out there?" My voice was steady, but my pulse was racing. "This is the sheriff's department. Show yourself." No answer. The sound came again, this time closer, a dragging noise like something massive being hauled through the undergrowth. My flashlight caught movement, a flicker of pale, grotesque skin slipping behind the trees. It was fast, too fast. I crouched low, drawing my pistol. My breath fogged the air, my training kicked in, and I radioed for backup. The dispatcher's voice crackled in my ear, but the words were broken, garbled. Static swallowed her reply, leaving me alone in the oppressive silence. The thing was circling me now, just beyond the light. I caught glimpses, long, twisted limbs that bent in ways no creature should move. Its body was thin, almost skeletal, covered in patches of coarse, wiry hair. Its face, or what I think was its face, looked stretched, the skin translucent and glistening. No features, just a grotesque suggestion of something that used to be human. "Stay back," I shouted, firing a warning shot into the air. The sound echoed, but the thing didn't flinch. Instead, it launched into the clearing, its speed terrifying. I barely had time to fire another round before it was on me. The force knocked me back, my head slamming against one of the ancient stones. My vision blurred, pain exploding in my skull. The creature loomed over me, its jaw unhinging to reveal rows of jagged, mismatched teeth. Its breath was rancid, hot, suffocating. Instinct took over. I kicked out with both legs, catching it in the torso. It reeled, giving me just enough time to scramble to my feet. My flashlight was shattered, but the moonlight filtering through the trees illuminated its grotesque form. It slashed at me, claws tearing through my uniform and grazing my ribs. Pain shot through me, but adrenaline kept me moving. I fired again, this time aiming for its chest. The bullet struck true, and the thing let out a guttural, wet shriek. It staggered but didn't fall. Instead, it lunged again, faster this time. I ducked, grabbing a jagged rock from the ground. When it came at me again, I drove the rock into its neck, feeling the sickening crunch of cartilage giving way. The creature writhed, its limbs flailing wildly, but I didn't stop. I drove the rock deeper until its movements slowed, then stopped altogether. Its body crumpled to the forest floor, still twitching. I staggered back, my chest heaving, blood dripping from my side. The thing lay motionless, its body already beginning to decay, its flesh sloughing off like wet paper. The stench was unbearable. I limped back to the trailhead, every step agony. When I finally emerged from the forest, backup had arrived. A couple of deputies stared at me, their faces pale. "What the hell happened out there?" one of them asked. I didn't answer. Instead, I led them back to the clearing, to Rory's body and the thing I'd killed. It was still there, its grotesque form a horrifying testament to what I'd faced. They believed me. They had to. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't human, and it wasn't alone. My name is Luke Guzman Hunter. I'm 50 years old, a retired high school teacher, and a widower. What I'm about to tell you happened just last month during a solo camping trip off Old King Road in Flagler County, Florida. I thought I was looking for peace and quiet, maybe even a little closure. Instead, I found something I still can't explain, something that might still be out there waiting. I arrived at the campsite in the late afternoon. The drive down Old King Road was scenic but desolate, with tall oaks draped in Spanish moss and palmetto crowding the edges of the narrow dirt road. My RV, a beaten-up 1994 Winnebago, rattled over every bump, but I was used to it. This wasn't my first trip, but something about the stillness unsettled me. I stopped at a convenience store a few miles before the campsite to grab some firewood and snacks. The woman behind the counter, Maggie, looked up from her magazine as I approached. "Camping out on King Road?" she asked, her tone casual but her eyes sharp. "Yeah," I said. "I heard it's quiet out there. Good stargazing." She hesitated. "It's quiet, all right. Just don't wander too far from your RV, and if you hear anything strange, don't go looking for it." I laughed it off, but her words stayed with me as I drove the final stretch to the campsite. The sun was low, and I parked near a pond. The water was dark and still, the air smelling of damp earth and decaying leaves. I liked the solitude, at least that's what I told myself. The first sign that something wasn't right came that night. I had a small fire going, and the RV's generator was humming softly. I was sitting by the fire, nursing a cup of instant coffee, when the generator sputtered and died. The sudden silence was jarring. "Damn thing," I muttered, grabbing a flashlight to check it out. Everything looked fine. No loose wires, no obvious problems. When I flipped the switch, it roared back to life as if nothing had happened. I returned to my chair, but the unease lingered. The forest around me felt too quiet, like the wildlife had been holding its breath. Then I heard it. A faint rustling in the bushes behind me. I turned, the flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing there. Probably a raccoon, I thought, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The next morning, I decided to explore the area. The pond looked serene in the daylight, its surface reflecting the gray sky. As I circled it, I noticed something strange. Footprints in the mud. They were large, clawed, and definitely not human. A chill ran down my spine. That's when I saw him, a teenage boy, maybe 15 or 16, standing at the edge of the trees. He was thin, with dirty clothes and wild yet unkempt hair. His eyes darted nervously, as if he didn't want to be seen. "Hey there," I called out. "Are you lost?" The boy flinched, but he didn't run. "You shouldn't be here," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What do you mean?" I asked, stepping closer. "Do you live out here?" He shook his head. "It's watching you. It watches everyone. You have to leave before it gets dark." Before I could ask more, he turned and bolted into the woods. I considered going after him, but something in his voice, pure, raw fear, stopped me. I returned to the RV, uneasy. That evening, I found a mutilated deer near the edge of the pond. Its body was torn apart, the flesh twisted and shredded as if by massive claws. I've seen animal attacks before, but this was different. It looked deliberate. I decided to stay inside the RV that night. The generator kept cutting out, leaving me in darkness for minutes at a time. Each time the lights flickered back on, I thought I saw movement outside the windows, shadows darting just out of sight. Around midnight, I heard a sound that froze me in place. My late wife's voice. "Gabe," Dana whispered. "Come outside." I knew it wasn't real. I'd been dreaming of Dana ever since she passed, but this was different. Her voice was so clear, so close. When it called again, I almost opened the door before catching myself. "No," I whispered, backing away. "You're not real." The whispers stopped, but the RV shuddered violently as if something heavy had slammed into it. I grabbed a kitchen knife and held it tight, my heart racing. The shuddering stopped, leaving me in silence. The next morning, I found deep scratches on the RV's door, like claw marks. The boy, Ethan, appeared again, standing at a distance. His eyes were wide, his face pale. "It's hungry," he said. "It doesn't stop." "What is it?" I demanded, approaching him. "What's out there?" He hesitated, then muttered, "It's old. It was here before us. It feeds on fear, on grief. If you don't leave, it'll take you. I tried to get him to explain, but he ran off again. This time, I followed him. He led me deeper into the woods, where the trees grew denser and the air colder. Finally, we reached a clearing with strange symbols carved into the trunks. Ethan pointed at them. "This keeps it out," he said. "Stay here if you want to live." Before I could ask more, he vanished into the trees. I looked around, my pulse hammering. The forest felt alive, the air thick with an oppressive energy. The whispers started again, louder this time, coming from all directions. I returned to the RV, but the hunger followed. That night, it showed itself. I was sitting by the fire when the forest went silent. Then I saw it, a shadowy figure at the edge of the trees. It was humanoid, but wrong. Its limbs too long, its movements jerky and unnatural. Its eyes glowed yellow, fixed on me. "Dana," it said, its voice distorted and hollow. "Come to me." I stood frozen as it stepped closer. The firelight flickered and I saw its face, or what was left of it. The flesh was stretched and rotting, its mouth too wide, filled with jagged teeth. I grabbed a can of lighter fluid and dashed it onto the fire pit, igniting a massive flame. The creature recoiled, letting out an unearthly shriek. I ran toward the symbols Ethan had shown me, the hunger chasing me through the trees. The moment I crossed the boundary of the symbols, the hunger stopped. It paced back and forth, hissing and snarling, but unable to cross. I stayed there until dawn, clutching the knife and listening to its guttural growls. When the sun rose, the hunger vanished. I returned to the RV, packed up, and drove away without looking back. I stopped at Maggie's store on the way out. She took one look at me and nodded. "You saw it, didn't you?" I nodded, too shaken to speak. "You're lucky," she said. "Most people don't make it out." Later, I tried to find information about Ethan, but no one had seen a boy matching his description in years. Some said he was a ghost, a victim of the hunger long ago. Others claimed he was something else entirely, a guardian of sorts, protecting the living from the forest's darkness. Whatever the truth, I know one thing for certain. The hunger is real, and it's still out there, waiting. My name is Jackson Foreman. I'm 43 years old, and this happened a few months ago when I was camping near Devil's Sinkhole State Natural Area in Texas. It was supposed to be a simple solo trip, a chance to rediscover my love for geology and shake off the lingering bitterness of my divorce. Instead, I encountered something that I can only describe as evil, and it changed the way I see the world and myself. I arrived at the park late in the afternoon after a long and tedious drive over rocky back roads. My RV's tires groaned as I forced it through trails that probably weren't meant for anything larger than an ATV. By the time I reached the edge of the sinkhole, I'd bent a rim and lost an hour to backtracking when I took a wrong turn. Still, the view was worth it. The sinkhole stretched wide and deep in the rocky landscape, its black maw gaping under the pale Texas sky. The guidebook said it was 400 feet deep, and as I stood at the edge, staring into the void, I could believe it. Hundreds of bats emerged from the darkness, their wings slicing through the evening air like whispers of another world. I set up camp close by, just outside the official boundaries of the protected area. The no trespassing signs didn't bother me much. I wasn't planning to do anything too destructive. I just wanted a good vantage point for studying the rock formations and maybe capturing some drone footage. It was the perfect spot for inspiration, or so I thought. The first strange thing happened as I unpacked my gear. I'd brought a high-end drone to get detailed images of the sinkhole interior, but it refused to power on. I charged it the night before, but now the battery was dead. When I swapped it for a spare, the drone buzzed to life, only to lose connection as soon as I tried to fly it over the sinkhole. "Damn signal interference," I muttered, though I couldn't see anything nearby that might have caused it. I shoved the drone aside and grabbed my camera instead. As I set up my tripod, the bats began to swarm out of the sinkhole in greater numbers. I froze, staring as their flight patterns shifted into something unnervingly deliberate. For a moment, they seemed to form the shape of a hand, claws extended before scattering into the twilight. I laughed uneasily, shaking off the feeling. "Just my imagination," I said out loud, though the words rang hollow. That night, as I lay in my RV, the silence felt heavy, almost oppressive. I was used to the stillness of remote camping, but this was different. It was too quiet, as though the desert itself was holding its breath. Then the noises started. At first, it was just a faint groaning sound, like the wind rushing through the canyon, but as I listened, the groan turned into something deeper, almost like a voice. It was low and guttural, resonating from the direction of the sinkhole. "Jackson!" I sat up straight, my heart pounding. The sound was faint but unmistakable. It was my name. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside, scanning the area. The beam of light cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but rocks and dry scrub. Still, the voice lingered in the back of my mind, as though it had edged itself into my thoughts. I told myself it was just the wind, just my imagination, but I didn't sleep much that night. The next morning, I found something unusual near the edge of the sinkhole. Partially buried in the dirt was an old, weathered book. Its leather cover was cracked and faded, but the pages inside were intact, filled with strange symbols and passages in a language I couldn't recognize. It looked ancient, and as I flipped through it, I felt a strange unease settle over me. The symbols seemed to shift on the page, their shapes warping and twisting as though they were alive. I should have left it there. I should have walked away. But curiosity got the better of me. I brought the book back to the RV, intending to research it later. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the noises started again. This time, they were louder. Marked, the voice was clearer now, echoing from the direction of the sinkhole. It wasn't just a sound, it was a presence, heavy and malevolent. I stepped outside, clutching my flashlight, and froze. Near the edge of the sinkhole stood a figure. It was tall, impossibly tall, with horns that curved against the sky and eyes that glowed like embers. "Who's there?" I called, though my voice wavered. The figure didn't move, it just stood there, staring at me with those burning eyes. Then it raised one clawed hand and pointed to the book sitting on the RV's table. I backed away, my heart racing. The figure vanished as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving only the echo of its voice. "Jackson!" The next few hours were a blur of panic and confusion. The voice grew louder now, coming from all around me. Shadows moved in the corners of my vision, too quick to catch, but too real to ignore. The RV's lights flickered wildly, plunging me into darkness before flaring back to life. Desperate for answers, I grabbed the book and began flipping through its pages. The symbols seemed to pulse, their shapes growing sharper and more menacing. My hands trembled as I tried to make sense of the cryptic passages, but the language was unlike anything I'd ever seen. Then the shadows became solid. Figures emerged from the darkness, their forms twisted and flickering like flames. They surrounded the RV, their eyes glowing red, their mouths whispering my name over and over. "Jackson! Jackson! Jackson!" I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed the book and ran outside, the cold desert air biting at my skin. The figures closed in, their whispers growing into a deafening roar. "What do you want?" I screamed, clutching the book to my chest. The towering figure appeared again, rising from the sinkhole like a shadow brought to life. Its voice boomed, shaking the ground beneath my feet. "You disturbed my domain," it said, its words cutting through the chaos like a blade. "You brought the book, you must pay the price." Its clawed hand reached for me, and I stumbled back, my mind racing. Then I remembered something, a line from an old myth about curses and spirits. "Burn the tether, and the curse will break." I didn't know if it would work, but I didn't have a choice. I grabbed my lighter, flicked it on, and held the flame to the book. The pages ignited, the fire spreading quickly as the symbols wreathed and twisted in agony. The figures screamed, their forms dissolving into smoke as the book burned. The towering entity howled, its voice shaking the air before vanishing into the darkness. When it was over, I collapsed to the ground, trembling and gasping for breath. The desert was silent again. The oppressive weight lifted. I didn't wait for dawn. I packed up what I could and left the park, abandoning the RV when it refused to start. I don't know what I encountered at Devil's Sinkhole, but I'll never forget it. The images from that trip, the ones I managed to recover, show things I can't explain. Shadows that shouldn't be there, shapes that defy reason. I've shared my story with a few people, but most don't believe me. Maybe I don't want them to. Some truths are better left buried.